Chapter 8:23. He felt as if he was in hell. On the operating table, Yu Dongri listened to the sounds of the instruments colliding with each other. He could not help but imagine that he was an innocent victim lying on the experimental table of a mysterious organization. Soon, a bunch of biochemical organs and viruses would be stuffed into his body, turning him into a messy monster. Then, a chip would be inserted into his brain, and he would become a random soldier that the main character in a fantasy story would kill after breaking into the enemy's base. While his body was being torn apart and cut apart, he still seemed to be distracted. His mind was filled with messy plots. He was laughing at himself. Then, the chief surgeon raised his head and looked at him. The eyes behind the mask were serious. "Name?" "Why, sure." He subconsciously hesitated for a moment before replying. Then, he saw the chief surgeon's expression become serious. "His self-awareness is in disorder. The operation will be suspended. Hurry up and arrange for a CT scan of his brain. Maintain the source." "No, no, no, I'm just kidding." He practically dragged the hole in his stomach and jumped up from the operating table. "I'm Yu Dongri. Yu Dongri, okay? Mr. Liu, you better not have a sense of humor when you're so serious." The chief surgeon picked up the oxygen mask and stuffed it over his face. He turned around and ordered the anesthesiologist, "Add 50 grams of Forsyth Forget Worries. Use the B4 concentrated version." "Yes." Soon, a faint purple gas flowed into his mouth and nose. Like ice water, it extinguished the messy thoughts in his mind and suppressed his emotions. Only cold, mechanical thoughts were left. "Everything is normal. The operation will continue." Just like that, he raised the chainsaw and cut open the layers of steel that covered Yu Dongri's heart. Sparks flew everywhere. An ear-piercing sound rang out. The box that imprisoned the demon was gradually opened. The seals that Huai Shi had placed on Yu Dongri's body were removed layer by layer. Outside the operating room, behind the floor-to-ceiling glass, Perron stood quietly with an expressionless face. He clenched his fists tightly behind him. His iron fingertips rubbed against each other, creating sparks. "Uneasiness. Don't be nervous." A voice came from the shadow beside him. "For this kind of thing, it's easy to do it the first time, but it's easy to do it the third time or the fourth time. Steady, steady." In the silence, Perron turned around indifferently and looked beside him. The woman drinking milk tea, the shadow under her feet, and the huge bird spreading its wings in the dark. "Tanguy." What's the matter?" "If you really want to comfort me, I only have one request." "Okay, go ahead. It's okay to change the lines you like. Just don't talk." "I beg you," said Perron. "Ahaha, my loving father is really scary when he's angry." Tanguy stared at the faint lightning in his eyes. She smiled but didn't say anything, because there was a clear cracking sound. The last shackle was broken. There was no heart behind the iron shell. Instead, there was only darkness and nothingness. It was like a crack leading to hell, surging with tides. At that moment, Yu Dongri's eyes fell into a daze and calmness. In the darkness, a pair of scarlet eyes slowly looked up. The eyes were like a gorgeous wheel, with countless needles spinning rapidly. A shrill sound burst out. The moment the chainsaw was raised, a sharp needle of darkness condensed into the shape of a needle and flew out from the crack in the heart. The chief surgeon's movements didn't change at all. He put down the chainsaw indifferently and picked up the instrument in his hand again. Because there was lightning bursting out of nowhere. As Perron lifted his finger, the ruler embryo's power was instantly crushed. But right after that, even more sharp needles flew out from within. 1 second, 2 seconds, 3 seconds. For seconds, the appearance of each needle gave people an unrealistic feeling of trance, as if time was rapidly passing, but immediately after, it was shattered by endless thunderbolts from the void. There were some needles that slipped through the chief surgeon's body, but the chief surgeon held the instrument expressionlessly and stabbed into the darkness. His hands didn't tremble at all. An ear-piercing sound burst out. In the countless cracks, the mosquitoes stopped moving and died in an instant. But in this desolate border, except for Perron, the chief surgeon's team, and Yu Dongri, there was no other living thing. Tangi calmly drank her milk tea and let the needles that grew out of nowhere penetrate her body. Then, the needles disappeared like phantoms, as if they had never existed. And from that moment onwards the solidification began. The crack in the heart spread rapidly, but it was blocked by the instrument in the chief surgeon's hand. Two fist-sized, semicircular complex instruments closed in the hole in the heart. After combining the technology of the Continuation Academy, a new law was born and instantly sealed the ruler embryo inside. In the darkness, countless needles spun wildly. A huge and solemn figure suddenly jumped from the other side of time. The ruler who had yet to be born wailed to his future self and called for help. Then, the ruler in his prime descended from the sky. Then, he saw the man in front of him, his bald head and his iron fist. King Hebe raised his eyes, and a ray of blazing lightning shot out from the corner of his eyes. The golden hand had already grasped his neck and slowly pulled him up from the ground. The terrifying power that was second only to the natural enemy had descended here and suppressed the monster's performance. This was the border, the edge of the three blockade. It was not in hell where he ran rampant. Is this all you can do, Dongli? Perron stared indifferently at the thing that was no longer his son. It seems that even if you start to do bad things, this is all you can do. It was really not like him. At that moment, the resonance of time was crushed by the iron fist. His body fell apart. From within, countless reeds, needles, complicated gears, complicated pendulums, and even needles inlaid with emeralds and jade fell from the cracks and quickly disappeared. The solidified person raised his broken head and wailed loudly, calling for his other self. He wanted to repeat the same trick, but it was too late. The huge alchemy array was activated at that moment, covering the ceiling, the floor, the four walls, and everything. Then, it disappeared into Yu Dongri's body. From that moment onwards, the distant past had been covered. The future no longer existed. The huge body stiffened in an instant, froze, turned into darkness, and dissipated. Only the ticking of the second hand echoed silently in his ears, hovering around Yu Dongri. It gathered in the crack in his chest. The operation continued, and from within, countless gears and reeds appeared, and then formed a complicated escapement mechanism. Countless machines were constantly changing, deducing countless classic clock structures. In the end, when the low heartbeat began to move together with the balance wheel and hairspring, a disc condensed on the surface of the heart. 3 sharp needles unfolded, and with the beating of the heart, they moved towards the future. Click. There was a soft sound. Yu Dongri opened his eyes and saw the future that was no longer far in front of him. He suddenly raised his hand and grabbed the chief surgeon in front of him. The moment his fingers closed, a sharp glass clip appeared between his fingers, and he held it tightly. It was almost close to the chief surgeon's pupils, causing his calm pupils to contract in an instant. "Are you okay?" He looked at the stunned doctor and showed concern for him out of the blue. The chief surgeon frowned and was about to speak when he heard a loud shattering sound. The floor-to-ceiling glass that had cracked during the struggle finally could not bear the weight and fell apart. Countless shards flew, but the place where the two of them were was not affected at all. The only fatal hidden danger had long been removed in the past, dead silence. The doctor was stunned on the spot, and Yu Dongri looked at him, waiting for his answer. He swallowed. "I'm okay. The operation was a success. What am I? A substitute? A damned Pawa?" After wearing countless observation devices, Yu Dongri stood in front of the shooting range and tried to move his body, but he found that there was almost no difference from before. There was no increase in strength, and he continued to be so weak that it made people cry. After taking 2 steps, he was panting. At most, he just said goodbye to the wheelchair. However, behind him, there was a pitch-black projection that moved according to his movement. It followed his changes and formed a ferocious humanoid creation with sharp edges and corners. It was like a demon created from the crystallization of hell, and it looked exactly the same as the ruler who had never been born and died in the womb. However, it had lost its terrifying corrosive nature and turned into another body that could freely switch between source substance and matter. Between the two, there was a thin rope that connected and sank into Yu Dongri's heart. When he received the notification that the test had begun, he lowered his head, picked up the pistol on the table, and aimed at the target in front of him. After thinking for a moment, he pulled the trigger repeatedly. But there was no sound of gunfire. When the needle on the exposed mechanical dial in front of his heart suddenly moved forward for a second, the target exploded into a pile of fragments. No trajectory could be captured, and no traces of gunfire could be found. Even the examination of the muzzle and hands couldn't find any traces of gunpowder. The order of time was disrupted. When the trigger was pulled, the bullet flew out, and during the process of hitting the target, the part where the bullet flew out was removed, and the only thing left was the terrifying result of pulling the trigger and hitting the target. But when he put down the pistol, there were continuous gunshots and sparks bursting out from where the muzzle was originally. A pile of bullet casings appeared on the ground out of thin air. They bounced, glowing with a red copper light. The experiment continued, and in the follow-up test, the 6 machine guns aimed at him continuously fired until the barrels melted, but they didn't hurt him at all. Only the wall behind him was full of holes. He casually strolled in the rain of bullets. The needle on the dial in front of his chest jumped back and forth without any pattern, constantly fiddling with the time axis of the objects, throwing the process of hitting him to after he left the place. With his own strength, he actually reached a level comparable to Kronos. It's just like a miracle. In the observation room, the ecstatic experimenter opened his eyes wide in excitement and looked back at Perron behind him. We can actually use the soul of a human to control the authority of a ruler. We have achieved an unprecedented result. It's not unprecedented, Perron said faintly. Similar experiments have already been done in the Preservation Institute's laboratory 70 to 80 years ago. This is just a sealed technology. After stripping away the key data and technology obtained from countless bloody sacrifices, its principle was simple. What it used was incomplete solidification. By artificially dividing a person's soul into 2 parts and forcibly solidifying one part, one could obtain an acquired and controlled solidifier. However, no one had been able to reach the terrifying depth of Yu Dongri, and the Continuation Institute didn't have the luxury of using people with resonant physiques as experimental subjects. Using the pollution that Huai sure couldn't eradicate, the process of transforming into the abyss was restarted. And the range was limited to Yu Dongri's heart. Through the dusty technology of the Continuation Institute, under heavy blockades, the solidification was now within the controllable range. At that time, the solidified part of the soul couldn't cover the entire soul outside, and could only turn inwards and complete itself in this narrow range. Even if it was the weakest and most basic structure. Like a weak premature baby, it was congenitally deficient and difficult to grow. Then, Perron, the ascendant who was second only to the 7 natural enemies in the entire realm, completely crushed the ruler's consciousness, smoothed it out, and controlled it with other technology. In the end, with the umbilical cord that couldn't be cut short as the hub, Yu Dongri's soul controlled his solidified body, achieving a different kind of control. This time, I'm a mother. Yu Dongri's excited shout came from afar. The corner of Perron's eyes twitched, and he couldn't help but want to clench his iron fist of domestic violence. But after holding it in for a long time, he finally turned around and pushed the door open. He saw the woman humming a song and playing with her phone in the corridor. "Are you done?" Tanguy looked up and asked. "I'll say this first, I don't provide after-sales service. If there are any problems in the future, I won't be responsible. Green Day can solve it, Perron said. Anyway, thank you for the technology you provided. Don't worry about it. Tanguy smiled happily and sighed meaningfully. I'm just thinking about my silly child. In the long silence, Perron was stunned for a long time. After a long time, he sighed softly. You really have become powerful. Have I? Tanguy said seriously. A big sister like me is always the embodiment of virtue that conforms to the times. Perron didn't want to talk to her anymore. In just 2 days, he was angry that he hadn't been in the past few decades. He was physically and mentally exhausted. After quitting smoking for so long, this was the first time he needed the comfort of nicotine. He shook his head and asked directly, "What I'm more curious about is, you actually came out? It's strange. You can betray me, so why can't I come out?" Tanguy asked back. I can't stay in a ruined library for the rest of my life, right? If that's the case, Russell's movements during this period of time can be explained. He pinched his chin and pondered for a moment. His expression gradually became ugly. Wait, do you want to rebuild the utopia? Tanguy's expression didn't change. Why not? Give up. It's no longer realistic, Perron said indifferently. Once the utopia is rebuilt, the entire reality will probably be affected. Source, substance, spirit, essence, and transformation. The 3 major axes. These were the 3 pillars that supported the reality. The silver sea projected by the source substance pillar, the heaven formed by the spirit essence pillar, and the 3 major seals supported by the transformation pillar. If the utopia was to be rebuilt, then it was imperative to rebuild the heaven. But the current reality could no longer support such a huge change, and after being absent for such a long time, this world could no longer make room for a behemoth like the utopia. The Command Bureau won't let you do as you please, Perron warned seriously. I'm not interested either. Look at what you're saying. I'm not here to talk to you about this. Tanguy widened her eyes and said seriously, I'm here to ask you for advice. You? Advice? Me? Perron suspected that there was something wrong with his ears. Yes. Tanguy came closer and held his hand. With a serious expression, she asked, You've been a godfather for so many years and taught so many children. You must be very experienced. For example, if a child reaches puberty and often ignores you or even despises you, how should you make him respect you like he did in the past? She thought for a moment and added, It's best to make him rely on you, the kind that can't leave you. In the long silence, Perron was silent for a very, very long time. His indifferent expression gradually shattered, and what emerged was an indescribable shock and disgust. Tanguy, people can't, at least they shouldn't. Chapter 8:24. 2 months later, when the early winter snowflakes fell from the sky, the special envoy commissioner from afar finally stepped into the land of Donbua after passing through the customs of Kyoto. Holding the sign of the Roman genealogy, the commissioner was able to go straight into the increasingly heavily guarded campus. He came to the office floor of the main building and saw the young man with a kind smile on his face. You want to see the teacher? Forrest Hutt turned the document in his hand over and over again, full of curiosity. Roman? Yes, that's right. The commissioner behind the desk did not show any signs of uneasiness when faced with difficulties. He calmly replied, I just have a notice to pass on. My identity can be guaranteed by the Mercury Agency under the Roman Hall of Chancery. You can verify it on the spot. Forrest Hutt shook his head. What's the matter? It's the same if you tell me. Sorry, I have to see him in person. The commissioner raised the box in his hand and showed the chains on his wrist and the box, including the things inside. They are all things that have to be handed over to him in person. To be honest, I believe that you are not some random person in disguise. Forrest Hutt scratched his face and said straightforwardly, but your organization's reputation is not very good. Do you understand what I mean? The commissioner nodded calmly. so I can understand your cautiousness. Simply put, although the Hall of Chancery was the center and core of the Roman genealogy and was very dignified, the suffix was different. Mercury Agency. Named after the traveler of the 12 main Roman gods, it seemed to be a messenger department, but in fact, except for being responsible for the postal system, its other work was essentially different from ordinary courier agencies. It was a secret service agency. It was notorious. Bribery, abduction, blackmail, assassination, and even terrorist attacks when necessary. In the long struggle with the Hawkeye Bureau of the Russian Federation, it had done many things without a bottom line. Letting such a person see why sure. To be honest, it was a little dirty to his eyes, please rest assured. The commissioner promised, I understand that Mr. Huaisher's state is inconvenient to see guests, but due to the limitations of my duties, I have to come and disturb you. I can guarantee that I will not do anything to harm Mr. Huaisher's personal safety. As soon as he said that, the expression of the people in the hut in the forest suddenly became subtle. It was as if he was looking at a fool. He scrutinized the man in front of him. He looked at the calluses on his fingers that had been washed away by medicine, the lethal weapons hidden in his bones, his thin body that was full of explosive power, and the scars on his arms that were left behind from hundreds of battles. He was indeed an expert. Even among Tier 3 experts, he was a formidable foe that caused others to tremble in fear. However, you? Little Hut in the Woods shook his head and smiled. I'm not worried about that. The commissioner frowned in confusion. He felt contempt, but he didn't care and didn't take it to heart. He just waited for his answer. This is... The cabin in the woods wanted to address him, but after thinking for a long time, he realized that he had never said his name when he introduced himself. Marcus. The commissioner prompted. Well, Mr. Marcus, you have the certificate of the Hall of Discipline, and I have verified your identity. You come on behalf of Rome. Our Donbua campus is not a place that doesn't know etiquette. We should warmly welcome you. The teacher will not be arrogant enough to refuse the emissary of the Hall of Discipline. Little Hut in the Woods thought for a moment and explained seriously, but the key is that he has been very busy recently. I don't know if he has time to take care of other things. With that, Little Hut in the Woods got up, took off his coat from the hanger, picked up the car key, and waved to him. You will understand when you see it. Please come with me. The commissioner was puzzled and got up to follow him. In this way, a car soon drove out of the garage, past the busy construction sites on both sides, passed through the gradually congested downtown, and even saw the legendary Foundry Research Center that was gradually growing like living metal. In this way they gradually went out. In the passenger seat, Marcus was expressionless, but his body gradually tensed up. Relax. If we have any bad intentions, we don't need to take you so far. Little Hut in the Woods seemed to know what he was thinking. Do you see the two people drinking tea in the campus gatehouse? The older one is called Tiantian. You may not have heard of him. The other person who plays chess with him is called Kamigawa. Marcus was silent for a moment and suddenly asked, Which Kamigawa? The one you have heard of. He was a fighter for the general. After he was laid off, he was sent to Donbua by the Sword Saint. Little Hut in the Woods explained, This is Donbua. We are not interested in your entanglements outside, and we have not fallen to the extent of attacking guests. You can rest assured. Marcus did not speak. Little Hut in the Woods glanced at him and did not answer again. In the silence, Marcus heard the sound of the tide gradually rising in the distance. A cool sea breeze blew through the lowered window. Under the afternoon sun, the blue sea in the distance showed a line. A distant sound faintly came from the wind. It was like the gentle sound of a cello, long and deep. The solemn sound of drums was embedded in it, forming a vast sound that spread in all directions. It seemed that the sound of the tide was also responding to the rhythm of the melody and blending into it. In the end, it turned into a complex and solemn symphony. Symphony number 9? Marcus raised his hand, took off the flat lens in front of him, and couldn't help but look out of the window. When he recalled the information of the King of Donbois, he suddenly understood. If he didn't have such a pursuit of art, how could he be called a disaster musician? In comparison, in order to satisfy his own preferences, spending a lot of effort to build a concert hall on the beach was not worth mentioning at all. He had seen more extravagant things. Compared with those things, this pure passion from the heart was even more admirable. However, when they turned around the ridge, they did not see the huge and solemn concert hall that they had expected. There was not even any sign of construction. There was not an entire orchestra playing here. There was only a bare beach and a small dock that stretched forward into the sea. From a long distance, they could see the back of the person sitting at the end of the dock, and a fishing rod in his hand that was thrown into the deep sea. The vast sea and the people were connected by a line. As a result, a mighty and magnificent symphony sprouted from the sea. The surging tide rippled in front of him like a blurry waveform, revealing the terrifying power surging in the undercurrent below. Under the interference of a fishing line, the surging tide was casually fiddled with by an invisible palm, colliding with each other and bursting out a roar, faintly turning into an earth-shattering noise. The sea seemed to be hissing, angry from the melody, roaring, singing, and chanting. It rose endlessly, towards the highest level guided by the melody. Just like that, it silently disappeared and returned to the sea. In the end, the layers of waves dissipated in an instant, replaced by a calm surface of water that was as smooth as a mirror. It reflected the sky and the tide in the distance. Only the lingering sound was left, slowly dissipating. Everything was like a miracle, but there was no fluctuation of any source substance from it, as if the scene of all things singing was just a coincidence. And at some point, Marcus was already sweating profusely. He finally understood why the cabin in the forest showed such an expression when he made a promise. He didn't need to guarantee Huaishi's safety. In front of that person, he couldn't even guarantee his own safety. He already knows we're here. The car stopped at the end of the road, and the cabin in the forest said, "Looks like you're quite lucky." A few days ago, he didn't want to see anyone outside, nor did he want to be disturbed. The youth raised his hand and pointed at the back. "No matter why you're here, you can go and tell him, Mr. Marcus, but please remember to be quick." "Is there a time limit?" Marcus asked. No. In a short silence, the youth, who seemed to have grasped the situation from beginning to end, suddenly showed a strange expression and couldn't help but sigh. "If I'm late, I won't be able to make it for dinner, and I'll be very miserable." Marcus was stunned for a moment, not understanding what kind of dinner could make such a young man worry, but he didn't intend to waste time. He pushed open the car door and walked straight to the distant figure. The closer he got, the more he could feel the pain of every step. It was as if the vast sea in front of him was pressing down on him. In the calm, there was a terrifying power that could overturn everything. He was approaching a burning volcano. But all of a sudden, all of this disappeared. The silent and calm sea suddenly became turbulent, and the surging sea rushed to the beach and the reef, bursting with noise. The fishing rod had been pulled out of the sea, and there was nothing on the hook. On the dock, the man wearing a sun hat turned around and looked at him. He took off the sunglasses on his face, full of curiosity. "Are you here to collect the fishing fee?" Marcus was stunned for a moment, and then he saw the man laugh and wave his hand. "I'm just kidding. Hello, I'm Huaishi, how should I address you?" He didn't ask any questions in a condescending manner. After picking up the fishing rod, the excessively young man took the initiative to step forward and extended his hand. Marcus didn't know how to react for a moment. "Hello, I'm Marcus." Marcus was stunned, but he maintained his professionalism and explained his identity. Rome's Hall of the Pharaoh, an agent of the Mercury Agency. He gripped Huaishi's hand carefully, letting go as soon as he touched her. "Hall of the Pharaoh? You don't seem to have anything to do with me?" Huai was puzzled. What's the matter? In fact, I received a commission from the Rome Space Agency to personally deliver this item to you. Marcus raised his hand, untied the shackles on his hands, and presented the box in his hand to the man in front of him. I'll wait for your answer. The box was not big, and it was not heavy, only the weight of a woman's bag. Huai held it in his hand and didn't feel any danger, but when he looked carefully, he found that there was no place for him to open the box. He wanted to ask, but Marcus had already turned around and stood in the distance, calmly waiting for Huai to call him forward again. Huai tilted his head, picked up the box in his hand, and sat back on the chair. He looked back and forth and found that the box seemed to be pure iron, without any unlocking or keyhole. Even with his perception, he couldn't find any welding places. All the metal crystals were arranged smoothly, and there were no cracks. There seemed to be some kind of alchemy array inside, maintaining the safety of the item. If he disassembled it violently, the things inside would be destroyed. Huai raised his eyebrows. A problem sent to him? What was the Roman genealogy doing? Chapter 825. In fact, this thing did not stump Huai for long at all. There was no need for the hand of confinement that was now integrated with the casting furnace. With Huai attainments in metals, he had already figured out the structure of the internal alchemy array through the box. Then, he just found a few places, entered the source substance a few times, and tried the password to open it automatically. The box was just to verify Huai identity. The person who opened it must be an alchemist proficient in metals. But when the box shrank and disintegrated inch by inch, there was nothing inside. There was only a symbol in the core. That was the emblem of the Helios workshop. Now, as the complex structure of the box continued to change and shrink, in the end, it actually overlapped into a fist-sized iron ball and fell into Huai hand. Through the fine hollow texture on the surface, he could feel the source substance moving in the complex array inside. Then, dozens of layers of the core moved, and in the end, it formed a map that he had never seen before. At that moment, the rope of sorrows sent out a profound sound. It made Huai freeze in place. According to the agreement from a long time ago, the alchemy workshop, the Helios chariot, called out to the alchemist who had made a contract with it. Marcus did not come on behalf of Rome at all, but this notice was passed on by the Mercury organization on behalf of him. Now, as the iron ball slowly unfolded, there was a faint flame in it. The Helios workshop was waiting for Huai response. The simplest way was to accept or refuse. Huai fell into silence. In the long silence, he raised his head and stared at the city behind him, the area that was gradually growing and flourishing. Everything had changed too quickly. In just a few years, he had changed from a wandering ascendant to a pivotal role in the entire Ingzhou. He was no longer the young man who had no choice. He had the power to say no, and could even repay the help from Helios 100 times over. Moreover, when he signed the contract, he did not know the contents of it. He could have ignored this call. No one could criticize Huai handling of this matter. But for some reason, the instant he received this invitation, what emerged in his heart was not resistance. Instead, it was indescribable joy. Even the sea breeze blowing from afar seemed to have become fragrant. A new adventure called to him. He chuckled softly. He no longer hesitated. Have you decided? Behind the screen, Russell scratched his head. Helios is not a peaceful place. Recently, it seems to be in a lot of trouble. Otherwise, the invitation letter would not have been delivered by the Roman genealogy. If you want to go out and relax, there are more and better choices. Look, isn't Shambhala a picturesque place? Huai laughed. I feel like I'll be in trouble no matter where I go. Is there a difference between Shambhala and Helios? Since you've decided, I won't object. Russell pinched his chin. Thinking about it, I'm quite surprised that you've been able to stay in Donbua for so long. In the past, you'd always leave when you caused trouble. This time, you've cleaned up your own mess. I think you've learned your lesson. Huaisher could not help but roll his eyes. Don't pretend to be obedient after taking advantage of me, okay? He retorted. I've been a tool for so long. Can you stop thinking about making arrangements for me? Look at what you're saying. This is a teacher's love for his student. You're hurting my heart. Russell laughed strangely and asked, How's your body? It's not wise to go out in this state. You can't go into the abyss just to fix a car, right? Huaisher sighed and scratched his head. It's okay. I'll bring Beelzebub. I still have Supreme anyway. At least I can run away if things go wrong. After getting used to his extremely strange luck, he had accepted the fact that something would definitely happen whenever he went out. It was impossible for him not to be prepared. After personally witnessing the duel between Elder Luo and the Sword Saint, his own development of resonance had reached a whole new level. Resonance may not be the most destructive of Supreme, but it was definitely the most versatile type. He had not been sitting by the beach these days to fish for fun. Instead, he had seized the time to consolidate the experience and understanding he had gained from that battle. In the end, what he had gained was not the scene that Marcus had seen, but a more subtle perception. The scale of the ocean rumble seemed terrifying, but it was actually the result of more than 2 hours of channeling by the beach. Apart from training his control, it did not have any actual combat value. His opponent would not let him channel for 2 hours and then stand still and let him stuff the ocean rumble into his stomach. Until now, Huaisher could only say that his Supreme was just a beginner. He did not dare to say how good it was, but at least he had a chance to escape when facing those unreasonable opponents in the past. Running fast was better than anything else these days. Really? Let's hope you can escape. Russell's smile became strange. Without waiting for Huaisher to ask again, he suddenly snapped his fingers. Speaking of which, it's about time. What time? The time to place the order. Russell lowered his head and looked at his watch. It should be now. Before he finished his words, there was a knock on the door. After pushing open the door, he saw a familiar smiling face with a camera on his shoulder. Hello, yesterday's delivery. The delivery man introduced himself and then asked directly, Name? Huaisher turned around and looked at the screen expressionlessly. Russell had already picked up the teacup and pointed at him with his mouth. Hurry up and start your performance. I've been waiting for this. Huaisher closed his eyes and pointed at the corridor outside the door. Get out, don't brother. This is a special request from the customer. Aren't we afraid of sending it to the wrong person? The delivery man squeezed out a smile from the gap of the door. Please cooperate. Can't you just cooperate? Cooperate my ass. I didn't buy anything. Get out. It's a package from the Abyss Archaeological Team. A Mr. Lucian sent it to you, and he specially ordered it for express delivery. The courier raised the package and shamelessly squeezed his way in. Brother, I'm 100% confident that my customers will give me good reviews. Just treat it as a favor and help me out. Let's go through the process. The corner of Huaisher's eyes began to twitch. After a series of exhausting traditional performances, Huaisher finally got her hands on the long metal box. She found that it was quite heavy inside. There were actually several layers of it, all of which were of the highest standard of single-use containment containers. Just the outer packaging alone was worth millions of dollars. What the hell? Huaisher scratched his head, wondering what his brother had sent him. Isn't this quite fast? After drinking enough tea, Russell finally put down the teacup and explained, When I asked for inventory, I found that there was no stigmata relic suitable for you, so I made an order with the archaeological team. I didn't expect Lucian to come personally. It seems that you have a good relationship with him. Huaisher was stunned. He picked up the box in his hand and asked, Stigmata relic? This? Yes, it's a precious item recovered by the archaeological team from the quiet area under the 22nd depth area. It's a fragment left behind by the Abyss Exploration Outpost of the Republic. Over the years, the dragon summoning flute has been searching day and night and finally found its trace. Russell waved his hand and said indifferently, "Open it and take a look, why sure. It's yours." Huaishur reached out and opened the lock on the top, opening the outer layer of seal layer by layer. In the end, after opening the last inner cover, he saw the incomplete creation sealed in the core. It was like a rusty iron rod half the height of a person. The grayish-black color was not conspicuous. If one did not pay attention, it would be thrown away like garbage. However, when Huaishur clenched and pulled it out, it emitted a high-pitched sound. A cracking sound burst out from under Huaishur's feet. He subconsciously channeled the burst of pressure into his feet, causing the entire office building to suddenly shake. The alarm was triggered, and an ear-piercing sound rang out. Countless traces of rust faded in an instant, revealing the color of steel. Dark green waves faintly surrounded it, revealing the echo of the sea. The inscriptions of the past had all disappeared, leaving only vague engravings to prove its identity. At that moment, the stigmata of the same lineage resonated and awakened the sleeping miracle. Xiangjuan, who had been silent for a long time in hell, woke up, revealing a vague outline. Sensing the divinity of Great Sea Ming, it let out an unruly clang in Huaishur's hand. It almost broke free from his hand. But soon, it found that it had nowhere to go. The power to break free quickly weakened, and in the end, it returned to its usual state. Only the rusty shell revealed the wear and tear marks of the vicissitudes of life. When Huaishur took a closer look, he found the sharp crack at the front of the iron rod. It was actually a broken part of the weapon, but Xiangjuan's power was clearly unblemished, and even exceeded Huaishur's imagination. That wild and fierce aura made one's scalp tingle. It was not like the gentle Xiangshui Lord, but more like a raging flood that wreaked havoc in the mortal world. Passing water spear? It's really you. Russell stared at the crack and lowered his eyes. Long time no see, Ing Fangzhou. Passing water spear? Was this originally a spear? Huaishur carefully examined the weapon in her hand. She could feel the loneliness and viciousness within it. She could almost empathize with the weapon itself, that indescribable remorse. The pain entrusted to it felt like it was tearing his soul apart. He hated that the raging waters would never return, and that it would be difficult to return to the past. It was too late. Even if he searched all the iron in Jiuzhou, it would not be enough to make a mistake. By the time he recovered from the intense headache, tears of blood had already flowed down from the corners of his eyes. "Be careful, Huaishur, don't go through other people's diaries," Russell said. "This is the hatred of the old seniors." This was a genuine relic of the stigmata. It was the crystallization of remorse left by the predecessor of the Road of Heaven's Inquisition, the former Lord of the Clouds, Ing Fangzhou. Chapter 8:26. Should I say that you're lucky or unlucky? Russell sighed softly. If you're unlucky, you might not be able to find this relic that's most suitable for you. But if you're lucky, the passing water spear is incomplete. Otherwise, it wouldn't be Xiangjuan, but a Tier 4 Yunzhongjian. It's so subtle that it gives me a headache. If the passing water spear was still complete, it would be Yunzhongjian's stigmata. Huaishur wouldn't need to find an item containing the divinity of the sea to prepare for advancement. He only needed the crystal of the Fountain of Light to complete the final ritual. But the problem was that the former Yunzhongjian had already turned into Xiangjuan, and the former passing water spear had become a broken iron rod. Moreover, it was unruly and had an astonishing hostility. It was not far from being completely eroded by hell. Instead of saying that he's dying, it's better to say that he hates the water, right? Luo Su said. Until the very end, I'm afraid he was still hating himself. That guy, what can you say about him? Huaishur stroked the passing water in his hand, and felt the sorrowful sound in it. He couldn't help but ask, Ing Fangzhou? Is that the name of that person? Yes, your senior. He was even older than me. When I became a member of the Utopia, he was already a mainstay. He had always been a loner and didn't like to deal with others, nor did he like to place his hopes on others. Russell said, "Now that I think about it, I really don't know if I should say that he was arrogant or violent. When I worked under him, I would be protected like a baby. Sometimes, even his subordinates couldn't stand it. They complained and complained countless times. That guy always thought that he could handle everything alone. But there were always times when he couldn't handle it." Russell sighed silently. "After so many years, I still don't understand why he didn't call for help until the Abyss outpost sank. Did he not want to burden us? If they knew that he was still alive at that time, everyone would have rushed to rescue him. Maybe he just didn't have the face to face others, so he wanted to die." Huaishur was silent. In the silence, he could hear the distant echoes from the broken body of the spear. It was a wave of regret that swept through like a surging tide, as if it would never end. He lamented the fall of that ideal. It would resist anyone's control and would only seal itself off until it was silently annihilated in the darkness. The rolling Yangtze River flows eastward, leaving behind only those who regret it for 10,000 years. He hated water. Then let's call it hateful water. Huaishur swung his hand, and the broken gun in his hand buzzed, causing the entire building to tremble again. It was the water flowing in the pipes that caused ripples. Violent energy surged. "Do you need me to get you another one?" Russell asked. "It seems like you're not very compatible with it." "No need. It's to my liking." Huaishur lowered his head and looked at the body of the spear that buzzed like a dragon on his knee. He whispered to it, "Before this hatred dissipates, we still have a long time to be friends." As if it understood Huaishur's words, the body of the hateful water spear shook again, causing a crack between his thumb and forefinger. Blood seeped out, and then the wound quickly healed and disappeared. Russell laughed. "Be careful. It has a temper." "I know." Huaishur put it back into the box and shrugged indifferently. "Anyway, I have a chatterbox here. They can talk all the time." With Xiang Jun's relic, the hateful water, Huaishur at least had power and weapon that he could use during the period when the sacred mark was disconnected. Moreover, this power was very compatible with his own supreme, and there was a lot of room for him to use. "So, is there anything else that you need help with?" Russell asked at the end. "Yes, there's a lot." Huaishur rubbed his face. "I'm lacking a lot of things here. Could you help me settle the Spring of Light Crystal?" While the Spring of Light Crystal was precious, the ivory tower was so huge that there should not be a single piece, right? "Of course there's such a thing," Russell answered matter-of-factly. "Although it's basically extinct, the ivory tower is a remnant of the Utopia and naturally has a lot of it. Excluding the one I used for my ascension, there are now 4 pieces. One is installed on the iron crystal base, the core of the Grandmaster's furnace. Another is installed in the dragon summoning flute, the most important lens. The other 2 are kept in the 2 abyss campuses, important components of the main framework of creation." Luo Su shrugged and replied with a smile, "Any one of these 4 places can help you advance. Which one do you choose?" Huaishur rolled his eyes. "Then can I have all of them?" "That will depend on your own efforts." Russell egged him on. "Go talk to Isaac, Mikhail, Ramanujan, and Madame Chen. As long as you persuade them, I will definitely support you unconditionally." He might as well not have said it. Huaishur could not be bothered with him. There were 4 of these things in the ivory tower, but these 4 things were used in the vital parts of the ivory tower. Huaishur was not so arrogant that he would reverse the organization's plan for his own ascension. The dragon summoning flute, the iron crystal base, and the 2 abyss campuses. One was the top radar in the entire territory, the other was the exploration base of Hell, and the other 2 were the assets that Russell had worked so hard to gather over the years. If any of them were missing, the ivory tower would suffer a great loss. But aren't you going to the Helios workshop? Russell asked. Go ask them. Helios definitely has these things. Really? Look at what you're saying. Do you think I would lie to? Before he finished speaking, after noticing Huai Shi's numb eyes, Russell suddenly coughed twice. Don't worry, I will never lie to you about this. Even if the entire territory is destroyed, Helios Treasury will definitely have these things. You've been there? Huai Shi's eyes became more and more suspicious. He even began to guess if this old guy had done something there when he was young, and now he wanted to use him as a scapegoat. Isn't this nonsense? Russell was about to get angry. Don't tell me you still haven't figured out what the Fountain of Light is? Isn't it just a spring? Looking at Huai Shi's confused face, Russell was a little angry. After staring at him for a long time, he could not help but look up to the sky and sigh. He forgot that this thing was not something Huai Shi could access. In the end, that woman Tongi dropped the ball and did not even mention this. Listen up, Huai Shi. The so-called Fountain of Light is not some spring water, border, or place in hell. It's a phenomenon. It was a phenomenon created by the gods. To be precise, it was a phenomenon created when the gods fell. When the gods of the past faced death, their enormous bodies would fall from the highest point of the realm. The will of heaven, the miracles, and even the origin substance that they had accumulated throughout their lives would flow out from their gradually crumbling bodies like blood, turning into a vast stream of light that penetrated the heavens and the earth, collapsed, all the way to the deepest part of hell. This was the last favor left behind by the god. The magnificent rainbow light that penetrated the present realm, border, and hell seemed to distort time, connecting the past and the future, creating countless untouchable mirages. It was because of this that it was called the Fountain of Light. And the crystallization of the Fountain of Light was the essence condensed from the dissipated providence. In other words, Huai Shi was dumbfounded for a long time before he reacted. If I want this thing, I have to find a god to stab to death first? Regardless of whether you can stab them to death or not, the gods are now about to become rare creatures, Huai Shi. Russell looked at him with a disappointed expression. They are strictly protected by the Astronomical Society, okay? There were only 3 gods left in the world. The fate of the other one was unknown. If one of them died for Huai Shi's advancement, it would be a big joke. This was not a matter of the genealogy fighting to the death, but the Astronomical Society would make Huai Shi, this traitor, die without a burial place. You can't do anything about the living ones, but you can think of killing them. Russell's voice trembled. Let's not talk about other things. Isn't there a section above Helios? You don't want meat or blood. You just want a crystal fragment less than the size of a finger. You've been a tool for so long, how can you not even talk about wages? Amazing! Huai Shi felt that he had reached a new height of stupidity. Such a precious thing, you want it just because you want it. Do you really think Helios is your home? If it's not for you, can't you steal or rob it? Russell's face was full of resentment and disgust. He slammed the table and scolded angrily. Back then, as soon as the words came out, he felt that something was wrong and forcibly swallowed them. Huai Shi's eyes became dangerous. What did you do back then? Russell looked away, waved his hand and said, Wasn't the price not agreed? Then I took a little more for myself. I worked so hard for so long, what's wrong with taking a light reflecting crystal? So, you really did do it before. Huai Shi felt that his worldview had received a new shock. Was there something wrong with the style of the celestial genealogy? It was not without reason that humans and ghosts hated them. They really touched them wherever they went. Don't say that the teacher didn't take care of you, Huai Shi. I've already given you the method. We don't have any surplus food. It's up to you whether to have a fat new year or starve. Russell said with a solemn face. Just do it, I believe in you. Can't you King believe in something better? Huai Shi did not want people to have any expectations of him when it came to breaking the law. Unfortunately, before Huai Shi could speak, Russell had already hung up the phone. It was already the next day when Huai Shi accepted the fact that he had fallen into a trap. After arranging the rest of the work, Huai Shi once again met Marcus from the Mercury Agency. "Mr. Huai Shi, I have reported your reply." Marcus reported, "Next, I will accompany you to Rome. We will rest in Pompeii for a day, and then take the manned spacecraft of the Rome Space Agency to Minerva 4 space station in the early morning of the next day, and then go to the moon a day later. When you get there, you can wait." Huai Shi felt that his ears were not right. He raised his eyes and looked at the opposite side. "Where did you just say we were going?" Marcus adjusted his glasses and answered calmly, "The moon." Chapter 8:27. I'm going to the moon. All of a sudden, I'm going to be sent to the moon. It shocked Huai Shi for a whole year. "Wait a minute, isn't there something wrong with your itinerary?" he asked doubtfully. "Why do you want to go to the moon? Can't you open a portal?" With that, he gestured a circle. "We'll arrive at Helios in a flash?" "Sorry, the Helios chariot is still outside the Earth-Moon space. It's not covered by the 3 major blockades of the present realm. Neither the Bifrost nor the border movement can be connected. We can only reach it by the most basic physical means." Marcus replied calmly, "The whole process is estimated to take about 4 days. You can board the Helios workshop." Huai Shi's jaw almost dropped to the ground. So, it was not just going to the moon. After reaching the moon, they had to fly out again? This was too F***ing exciting. And the problem was that in the vast space, there was no way to escape if there was a problem. What if the ship blew up? He finally understood the strange look on Russell's face when he said that he could escape. I'm not mentally prepared at all." Huai Shi said, "I'm seasick." "It's okay, we'll provide seasickness medicine. Mine is more serious. We have tranquilizers." In silence, Huai Shi and Marcus looked at each other. "Big brother, if you don't know how to chat, we'll kill the conversation." After a long time, Huai Shi rubbed his face and sighed, seriously, "Can I go back on my word?" He was really a little scared. Marcus did not speak. He was calm as always. "Okay." Huai Shi shook his head. Since he had said that he would go, there was no need to go back on his word. Besides, he was also envious of the alchemy in Helios. Wasn't it just taking a rocket to the sky? It was as if no one had a dream of landing on the moon. "I only have one request," Huai Shi said. "Please go ahead." "Let's go to Rome first," he said. "I have a friend there. I promised her that if I go to Rome, I must meet her. We are pressed for time. But there's always room to squeeze, right?" At this point, he couldn't help but scratch his head and look at his office. Where could he find a gift for her? They packed their clothes, packed their bags, and stuffed their equipment. He bid farewell to the crows in the cage of dreams. "Make the following personnel arrangements." And most importantly, after giving the 2 students enough homework to do for 2 months, Huai Shi carried his saddlebag out of the door in high spirit. At 2:00 in the afternoon, they arrived at Rome, the capital of Rome, known as the City of 10,000 Gods, a place where all the sources of the Western genealogy gathered. Although the name of a country's capital sounded like a Russian doll, the exotic scenery quickly attracted Huai Shi's attention. There were too many things for the eyes to take in. It was great to go out alone. She could do whatever she wanted, and there were no annoying bad things following her around. "Where are we going next?" asked the crow on his shoulder. "Of course, we are going to the capital," Huai Shi subconsciously answered halfway. Suddenly, he realized something and turned his head sluggishly. The smile on his face stiffened when he saw the black-hearted creature jumping around on his shoulder. "Why are you here? Why can't I be here?" Tangi asked in confusion. "Aren't you my contractor?" "No. Why did you suddenly appear?" Huai Shi was dumbfounded. Haven't you been appearing and disappearing all of a sudden recently? A mature and wise big sister will always appear in the right place at the right time. Isn't that reasonable? Tongi blinked her big eyes. Besides, I have been reflecting on myself recently. Am I not caring enough for my contractor? Am I not gentle enough? Am I not understanding enough? Am I not able to listen to my contractor's troubles? Caring, gentle, understanding, listening to troubles. The corner of Huaishi's mouth twitched, and he doubted from the bottom of his heart, do those words you said have anything to do with you? In short, I've already turned over a new leaf. Tongji raised her little wings and wrapped them around his neck, assuring him, you see, I'm just trying to make up for what I'm lacking. That's why I've resolutely decided to put down the work that's worth a few billion to spend a happy trip with you. All right, since you've said so, let's pray for Helios next. No, we have to pray for the manned space shuttle first. I hope Rome is fine. Huaishi only felt his vision go dark. He saw his dark future full of arrangements. Just as Huaishi was petrified, Tongi stood comfortably on top of Huaishi's head. She spread her wings and felt the wind blowing against her face in a foreign country. It was as if she wanted to embrace the relaxing and warm vacation that was coming. By the way, where did you say we were going? She asked casually. Huaishi rolled his eyes, walked into the taxi, and told the driver the destination. Imperial University. Name? In front of the Imperial University, an old guard on the steps held a long staff and looked down at the backpacker in front of him. Young man, the Imperial University's opening day is on Wednesday. You came at the wrong time. Why did they like to do this everywhere they went? Is there something wrong with you? It's not a tour, it's a visit. Huaishi raised his hand and took out his work ID from the ivory tower from his pocket, as well as his passport with the Roman genealogy stamp. In fact, he still had a military officer's ID from the Astronomy Association, which could allow him to do whatever he wanted in the present state. However, there was generally no need to show the military officer's ID. This was because when they needed a military officer, everyone usually acted directly. After they became a corpse, no one knew how to ask for the ID. Therefore, the reputation of military officers was generally not very good. To some extent, they were even more annoying than the local snake inspector. Therefore, in order to avoid unnecessary accidents, Huaishi decided to endure for the time being. Well, 3 seconds. If this old man didn't know what was good for him, he could smile crookedly. However, the scene he expected didn't happen. After the old man took the ID, although he was doubtful about Huaishi's age, he still took out his reading glasses from his pocket, put them on the bridge of his nose, and unfolded the ID to look at it carefully. He frowned. He looked down at the ID and then looked at the young man in front of him. His frowned eyebrows curled up strangely. That strange expression was as if he had seen something incredible. Huaishi. He confirmed again. You? Yes, me. Huaishi asked in confusion. Is there a problem? No, no, no. Please come in, please come in. The old man quickly put on a serious look and stepped aside, motioning for Huaishi to come in. However, when Huaishi walked in, he heard the old man run to the corner, slapping the wall and laughing wildly. What the hell? Huaishi scratched his head in confusion. But then, he heard a surprised voice. It came from the front. It almost broke. Huaishi. A girl in the square in front of him exclaimed, Look, Huaishi is here. Oh my God, it's really Huaishi. He really appeared. I thought it was a rumor. Oh my God. Huaishi was stunned for a moment and looked around. The pedestrians who were originally walking stopped in their tracks and followed his line of sight in astonishment. Then, they could not help but smile, as well as a pleasant surprise that could not be faked. There were even bold girls waving at him and calling enthusiastically, Huaishi, come here quickly. Let sister hug you. Come to mommy. Let me touch you, okay? Huaishi was stunned and subconsciously took a step back. He covered his chest in horror. They were half a world away. Was he really that popular in Rome? Why were his fans still so enthusiastic? Wasn't this a little too spirited? They hugged and hugged him as soon as they met and even wanted to take his virginity. This was too exciting. For a moment, he didn't know whether he should reject them seriously or welcome them. But no matter what, he had to respond to the enthusiasm of his fans. Just as he showed a gentle smile and opened his arms to welcome the storm of female fans, he felt a push from behind. Seeing that he didn't respond, he pushed again. "Hey brother, make way. You're in the way." Huaishur waved his hand impatiently. "I'm having a fan meeting here. Don't interrupt." But then, he touched a hand of fur. A hand. When he looked back blankly, he saw a giant dog standing behind him without him knowing. The classic black and white color scheme, unruly eyes, a pair of blue eyes, and a crooked mouth at him with a wicked smile. Then, she arrogantly raised her head and pushed him away. She walked forward with small, elegant step. Soon after, she was surrounded by enthusiastic big sisters in the midst of cheers. Screams of surprise sounded. "It's really Huaishur!" Someone shouted excitedly. "I touched Huaishur. Huaishur's fur is so soft. His stomach is so soft too. His paws are so good too." Countless hands covered the giant dog that was as tall as a person. Surrounded by a few broad chests, the big dog let out a happy howl and turned over in the arms of the big sisters, revealing its white belly. It was so happy that it rolled its eyes. Just like that, in the midst of thousands of flowers, it turned its head and looked disdainfully at Huaishur in the distance, grinning mockingly. "Are you an idiot? Stinky brother from outside, go away, okay? This is my special show." Huaishur was in a bad mood. Looking at the familiar face, he couldn't believe it, couldn't understand, and felt as if he was struck by lightning. His popularity couldn't be compared to a dog? No one even noticed him. "Hey, does anyone know me? I'm Huaishur too. I can sign." The more he said, the sadder Huaishur felt. He felt like an outdated idol looking at a dog on the hot search headlines. What kind of King world was this? At the end of the square in the distance, on the marble base, there was a big golden dog sculpture, a vivid silly expression, and that iconic wicked smile. Is there something wrong with the Imperial University? Chapter 828. After the free massage was over, the dog on the ground slowly got up, shook its body, and shook its fur. At the same time, it pushed away the fans who still refused to let go and lowered its head to pick up the takeout box next to Huaishur. When it turned around, a pair of icy blue eyes glanced at Huaishur and shook its head. It meant, "What are you waiting for? Come with me." Huaishur's expression twitched. He began to think about what would happen if he shot a dog that tried to attack the military officer of the Astronomical Society in Rome. It was so big that it couldn't be stewed in a pot. There were so many children in Australia who couldn't eat. Why didn't he sacrifice it? The dog seemed to have guessed what he was thinking. It snorted disdainfully, grinned, and revealed a mouthful of metal-colored fangs. It planned to fight with this stinky brother. Huaishur rolled his eyes. He didn't want to interact with it anymore. He inexplicably felt that a dog was easy to understand. There must be something wrong with him. "It seems that you get along well with it." A curious voice came from beside him. Is this what it means by the same sex attracting? When Huaishur turned around in surprise, he saw the person who had appeared beside him without him knowing. She was looking at him with her head tilted. Her hair, which had been cut to her ears, reflected the sunlight and glowed faintly. It lit up that pair of quiet eyes. They were full of joy. She put her hands behind her back, smiled, and waited for his answer. After a long time, Huaishur finally came back to his senses and couldn't help but laugh. "Long time no see, Fui. Hasn't it only been a few months?" Fui reached out and took the takeout box from the dog's mouth. She looked at him. "Have you had lunch?" "Not yet." "Then let's go together." She nodded. "I just ordered ham pizza, which has been very popular recently. You must try it when you come to Rome. It was as if she had known in advance that he was coming. She took out a lunch for two from the box. It was steaming hot and had just come out of the oven. There was also a whole serving of heavyweight roasted beef leg. There was no salt and it was still bloody. The dog opened its mouth and picked it up, wagging its tail as it ran away. It seems like it has a girlfriend recently. It must be eager to show off. Just leave it be. Seeing it run away, Fu-Yi lowered her head and laid out the tablecloth. I've been waiting for a long time to get this seat. This is the place with the best scenery in the Empire University. Huai-Shi sat on a stone bench and looked around. At the edge of the quiet lake was a lush forest. The winding path extended into the distance, and he could faintly see the auditorium and the bell tower in the distance. She didn't expect there to be such a beautiful place in Imperial University. In the ever-changing world, the city of Rome seemed to be stuck in the past and had never adapted to the changes of the times. When one went deep into the tranquility, it gave one a sense of tranquility and relaxation. Fu-Yi had clearly ordered takeout, but she didn't eat much herself. She watched the way he ate, and that kind of happy smile always made Huai-Shi a little uneasy. "What's wrong?" he asked. "Finished." "Yes, more or less." Huai-Shi nodded. "Then, here comes the important part." She reached out her hand and blinked, not hiding her expectation. "Did you bring a gift?" Huai-Shi's face twitched. He touched his satchel and took out a box. Finally, he felt guilty. "I was in a hurry this time, so I only brought this." "It's okay. Take it out and let me see." Fu-Yi raised her eyebrows and happily took the box. She opened it and saw another box inside. After the box was opened, it was another box. Her expression stiffened. She raised her head and said angrily, "Are you playing with me? Isn't this too grand?" Huai-Shi shrugged with a dry smile and moved back a little. "This is the last layer. Open it and see. I specially chose it for you." The innermost paper box was opened. After crossing thousands of miles, the specialty from Donbua finally appeared in Imperial University of Rome and was displayed in front of Fu-Yi. It was as thick as a wrist and heavy, a metal rod? Fu-Yi's smile twitched and gradually became dangerous. "What is this?" "It's a new product that I took from the laboratory before I left. You can think of it as a new type of alloy. Its hardness and toughness are much better than similar products outside. It also has the characteristics of origin substances and can repair itself. Even if there is a crack, just pour some iron powder on it and it will heal after a period of time." Fu-Yi sighed. She raised her hand to interrupt him and asked bluntly, "So, what is this thing used for? To blow your dog's head off? A teeth-grinding rod?" Huai-Shi shrunk his neck and explained, "Didn't you always complain about dogs randomly biting things? This can at least last for a few months." There was nothing he could do. He had left in too much of a hurry. He had originally planned to wait a little longer and prepare something better for Fu-Yi's birthday. Now that he had suddenly arrived in Rome, he had no time to prepare at all. He also didn't want to go to a local specialty store and buy something to fool her. After thinking about it, only the products that he had participated in the research and production of were barely presentable. Origin substance mixed crystal alloy teeth-grinding rod. This was probably the toughest teeth-grinding rod in the world, right? Fu-Yi lowered her head to look at the metal rod in her hand, then looked at Huai-Shi's face. She tried very hard to resist the urge to stuff this thing into his mouth. "This really is useful." She rubbed her throbbing forehead and casually placed this thing to the side. "You're a district head now. Can't you give me something to add to the atmosphere? I saw it on the news. The king of Donbua is so powerful. But in reality, it's completely different from what the news says." Huai-Shi shook his head and couldn't help but feel helpless. "Some of the news even made me blush when I saw it. It was completely overblown. I didn't even know I was that powerful. But I feel like you're at least more powerful than what the news says," Fu Yi thought for a moment, then said seriously, more powerful than what those people think. When she said this, Fu Yi's expression became serious and happy. It was as if she believed from the bottom of her heart that everything he had created had irreplaceable value. Huai Shi felt even more embarrassed. Okay, don't sit here. Let's go. She got up and extended her hand to invite him. It's rare for you to come here. Let me show you around the school. After all, you're so famous. I'll be very proud too. Huh? Could it be that I'm famous here? Of course, you have a lot of fans. Fu Yi nodded and couldn't help but glance at the husky playing in the lake in the distance. Her expression suddenly became subtle. The candidate for the mascot of the University of Rome, Huai Shi. He was so popular. To Huai Shi's surprise, the trip to the University of Rome was much calmer and more peaceful than he had imagined. There was nothing to disturb, and no untactful people came to interrupt. It was as if all the unpleasant scenes had been blocked. All that was left was a lazy time. Under the warm afternoon sun, they walked slowly along the path in the spacious school. Fu Yi introduced the areas and places here to Huai Shi. They chatted casually, as if they were digesting food after a meal. To the moon? Fu Yi exclaimed. That's amazing. It's not a good place. Huai Shi sighed. It's troublesome to come and go. There isn't even a bus. It's really not a good place to travel. After all, it's space. Fu Yi walked in front with her hands behind her back. Her footsteps were light. Earlier, the school had an application for the lunar research base. I wanted to go, but I didn't apply. I was rejected at the first stage. I'm afraid that my major is too obscure. It's not suitable. I remember that you are in social psychology, Huai Shi asked doubtfully. Psychology is meaningless to go to the lunar laboratory. What were you thinking at the time? Why did you apply for this? Fu Yi turned back and glanced at him as if she was angry. She told him, of course it's easy. That's really not your style. Huai Shi never thought that a person like Fu Yi, who paid attention to results, and efficiency, would apply for an illusory major like psychology. Management and economics were where her interests lay. He couldn't imagine Fu Yi being a caring sister and counseling patients. Maybe she would be so angry that she would hit patients who didn't follow the doctor's instructions. Correction, it's not psychology or sociology. Fu Yi emphasized again. It's Jungian theory, thank you. Something like that? Huai Shi, a layman, didn't know much. Jung? Wasn't that the historical researcher of sociology and psychology? Due to its special nature of not being able to be verified and replicated, it couldn't even be compiled and classified as a scholar. It didn't seem like the future was bright. If you think it's something like that, then it's something like that. Fu Yi shook her head and gave up explaining the importance and practical use of Jung's theory to this guy who knew nothing about cultural subjects other than art, as well as the important role of archetype theory in the Silver Ocean. This kind of restricted major, which the Continuing Institute and Imperial University were in opposition to, didn't exist in the outside world from the beginning. It was natural that others didn't understand. But in the end, they were just students. Compared to those truly glorious things, those that truly turned the world around, it was not worth mentioning. There was nothing to show off. Along the way, it seemed that Fu Yi was quite popular here. There were often people who greeted her warmly and kindly. Some people would also rub two dogs running around in front of them and give them a hot dog or grilled sausage. Because they're running for mascot recently, many fans are actively canvassing for it. Fu Yi explained, according to this trend, it might be the official mascot of Imperial University next year. By the way, the gap between second place and third place was about as big as the gap between third and 10th place added together. Huai Shi would definitely debut at Imperial University. Huai Shi's eyes twitched when he heard this. Can't you change its name? I want to change it too, but it won't recognize other names. Fu Yi shrugged. It seems to like this name. If you don't believe me, you can try calling it. Isn't it a bit too much to let people call their own names to dogs? I think people who are so serious about dogs should also reflect on themselves. Fu Yi looked over with a faint smile. Huai sure didn't know why, but he suddenly had nothing to say. There was only silence. A soft wind blew from afar. Scattered sunlight fell through the gaps in the shade, shining on her cheeks and illuminating her smile, as if waiting for him to say something. But soon, the low sound of a bell rang from afar. It announced the end of leisure. When turning a quiet corner, Huai sure saw the two people waiting at the end of the road. Marcus and an old teacher in a robe seemed to be having a conversation. After noticing the arrival of the two, they stopped. They waited quietly. Huai sure sighed unhappily. Fu Yi seemed to understand and looked over. Is the lunch break over? Yes. He could sense the gazes from afar, quietly staring at the intruder on the campus, constantly reminding him of his identity. Sorry, he said. I probably have to go. It's okay. Fu Yi thought for a moment and smiled indifferently. Business is more important. Just remember to bring me some letters from the moon. After saying that, she emphasized again seriously. I will always be watching you. Don't forget. Don't worry, no problem. Huai sure patted his chest and promised. So she smiled, stood under the shade of the tree, nodded, and said goodbye. Then, I wish you a safe journey. Okay, goodbye. Huai sure waved his hand, picked up his backpack, and waved goodbye to her. After walking for a long time, he looked back and saw that she was still standing there, watching him leave. It made him feel lost. He walked out of the school gate, feeling a little melancholy and absent-minded. It seemed that he had neglected something and left something behind. But he thought for a long time, but he couldn't remember what he had forgotten. He could only look back and take one last look at the Empire University behind him. It wasn't until he was sure that the familiar figure could no longer be seen that he sighed softly and left with the rope. Chapter 829. Under the shade of the tree, the old woman who had just spoken to Marcus slowly retracted her gaze. She looked at the student beside her. The student was also looking at her with a curious expression, as if he didn't know what had happened. Until she took the initiative to ask, Fu, I just discovered that there's an abnormality in the projection of the Silver Sea in Imperial University. Do you have any clues? Is there? Fu Yi blinked innocently. I didn't notice, teacher. The old professor was still smiling. If you trace it back, you can find traces. All right. The girl sighed. I just cut the line and ordered a pizza. There's no need to be so alarmed, right? Just ordered a pizza. The old professor looked in the direction where Huai Sure had left with a faint smile. The surveillance cameras that were projected from afar were still maintained and did not relax in the slightest. Look, even the people from the Directorate of Defense were frightened. They thought that an old woman like me was up to something again. Sorry, teacher. It's nothing. These are still within my authority. Besides, I just ordered a pizza, right? The old man looked at her deeply. This is not a big deal, Fu. But as a teacher, I don't want you to squander your talents so easily. Any operation of the Silver Sea needs to be considered and weighed repeatedly. If it weren't for the unshakable determination of Pompeii's destruction and the responsibility to bear the worst consequences, it would be impossible to touch the authority of this ruler. All careless interference will have unpredictable consequences. You should keep this in mind. I promise. Fu Yi nodded and answered seriously. It was like the guarantee of every good student, reassuring. Then, don't do it again. The old woman raised her hand and snapped her fingers. Invisible ripples spread from her fingertips, causing the faint fog that shrouded Imperial University to silently dissipate. There were no more traces of operation. Let's go, child. The afternoon class is about to begin. She glanced at the student behind her. What I'm going to teach you today is the analysis of the Throne Angel's prototype, as the bell in the distance dissipated. A new class began. I'm very sorry to interrupt your meeting with your friend. On the border express to the launch site, Marcus finally explained to Huaishur, who had a long face. But the visitors of the Preservation Institute have been urging us, and we can't do anything. Visitors? Huaishur subconsciously glanced at the wristwatch on his wrist. He still had a destruction elemental derivative in his pocket. It was indeed inappropriate for him to wander around Imperial University. Donbua had been so comfortable that he could go wherever he wanted to go that he had forgotten about it. Unexpectedly, Marcus added, "After all, Ms. Fu Yi's identity is sensitive." Huaishur frowned as he realized that things were not as simple as they seemed. Whose identity are you calling sensitive? Ahem, Madame Fu Yi is an important person under the protection of the Bureau. Strictly speaking, she can't meet with someone like you who is contaminated with the elemental destruction. After all, it involves the protection of an important person. Wait a minute. Huaishur raised his hand. Can you start from the beginning? What important person under protection? Marcus' expression stiffened. He adjusted his glasses and looked to the side. I can speak slowly, but can you tell your pet to stop eating? After all, if it continues eating, the carriage will be gone soon. What the hell? Huaishur was stunned. He waved the rope in his hand angrily. Where did my pet come from? F***ck, what the hell is this? It was only now that he realized that he had been holding on to half of the rope all the way from Imperial University to the Border Express. And then, on the other end of the rope was a dog? A huge husky. It was as if it had been blocked in a blind spot. It was only now that Huaishur realized, no, it should be said that he finally noticed, that the dog was about to eat all the chairs behind them. Where did this dog come from? Huaishur was shocked. She raised her leg to kick the dog, but the dog was not to be outdone. It pounced on her like a tiger and bit her hand. Huaishur was not a pushover. He decisively dug the dog's heart into its stomach. The dog reciprocated. It lowered its head and bit Huaishur's wrist, refusing to let go. It almost bit through his metallized right hand. Huaishur was furious. He pulled out Lord of the Flies and was about to stuff it into the dog's mouth. Unexpectedly, the dog opened its mouth wide and aimed its throat at Huaishur. And then, Hutue! A stream of lava instantly gushed out, brushing past Huaishur's hair and landing on the carriage. It actually burned through the cabin. This was a F***king weapon of mass destruction. How did it get through customs? Wait, I seem to be the one who brought it here. Huaishur's mind went blank. Only then did he remember that when he passed through customs, the inspector gave Huaishur a stamp, stroked his dog's head, and praised him. Sir, your dog is really good. The dog's clearance permit was still nailed to his passport. Thinking of this, Huaishur's legs trembled. In other words, he had to be responsible for all the damage caused by this dog? Suddenly, a term that contained both topography and plants appeared in his mind 100,000 times. Why the F***ck did he bring this dog here from Imperial University? Seeing the dog open its mouth again, Huaishur's face suddenly changed. He rushed up and closed the dog's mouth, pinching it tightly and pressing it under its butt. On the opposite side, Marcus, who had witnessed this dragon and dog fight, was dumbfounded. He had never seen a person fight so fiercely with a dog. He could abuse a small animal in such a majestic manner. He was in awe. He almost wanted to clap his hands. This was the Prince of Paradise. He loved it. This is a misunderstanding. Huaishur emphasized seriously, this dog is not mine, really. I understand. Marcus promised, I will keep it a secret, definitely. You have to believe in my professionalism. With this stupid dog interrupting, Huaishur didn't know how to ask about Fu Yi's situation. But looking at the stupid dog beside him that he had unknowingly brought from Imperial University to the train, he seemed to understand something. Could it be that Fu Yi's talent in the Night of the Witch could still be used outside? A psychic manipulator? She could even influence him unknowingly? Wasn't this a bit too much of a bug? For a moment, Huaishi's mind went blank. Only a lot of discordant words such as editor, X-system, magician, and so on jumped out uncontrollably. What kind of operation is this? He asked quietly in the Book of Destiny. Isn't this normal? Tangi asked in puzzlement. After all, it's the final masterpiece completed by that child, Chassel. It's not strange for her to have this little ability, right? Huaishi was numb. He was stunned for a long time, in disbelief. Are you talking about a dog or a human? Aren't humans and dogs the same? Tangi replied lazily. To be honest, the dog is a byproduct for her. This is all thanks to you. Me? Huaishi's eyes widened. What does this have to do with me? As an experimental subject, you are the winner of the Night of the Witch that ushered in the dawn. Without your help, Chassel couldn't have completed her work. Tangi said, don't you understand what her final creation was? It wasn't Bichimo's, nor was it the elemental transformation of the beast of eternal life and the rancher, but the cycle of that world itself. The consciousnesses of all the species gathered and formed a miniature silver sea in hell, a complete sandbox of reality. It has everything that the silver sea has. In other words, anything that works inside will also work outside. Even if the power inside couldn't be brought out, the experience, comprehension, and feelings were things that couldn't be forgotten after experiencing them once. Putting aside the fact that you're having fun all the way here, have you forgotten about your teammates' gains? But she didn't become a sublimator. Yes. Tangi asked seriously, isn't this the most precious thing? For the Silver Sea, all sublimators are unfilial children who want to run away from home after achieving a little. Obedient children like Fu Yi who willingly stayed behind are few and far between. After losing the insignificant chance of ascension, her connection with the Silver Sea increased instead. And after having the experience of the convergence of endless consciousness and the experience of personally driving the operation of the unified consciousness, she is already one of the people in the world with the closest connection to the Silver Sea. Chassel single-handedly nurtured her into his most outstanding work, pouring his last bit of care into her, hoping that she would be able to comprehend something from the confusion of life. From the moment the Night of the Witch ended, her resume was uploaded to a higher level of power through the decision-making room, and she became a key target of protection. Her value is even higher than that of Yu Dongri, who has a complete resonance physique. How can a sublimator be compared to her? Indeed, she didn't have the talent to create, nor did she have the aptitude to destroy. This ability would only reveal its true value when it was used to maintain things. The original engravers of the Silencer's stone tablet had already taken her into their attention, and began a long period of observation and waiting. They hoped that one day she would be able to grow enough to take over the heavy responsibility from her ancestors. She would become the guardian of the Silver Sea. Group meme shielding, super wide area consciousness interference, sealing of hell's knowledge, and even guiding the human subconscious through the Silver Sea, she would establish common sense, ensure order, and maintain the operation of the present society to ensure the stability of the Silver Sea. She had the potential, the ability, and even the valuable internship experience. The only thing she lacked was the education to guide this power out. Huaishi listened and didn't react for a long time. He really couldn't understand. Why was such an aptitude so precious, but someone would use it to stuff me with a dog? He pulled the dog's face in front of him with both hands, pulling the corners of its mouth, and scrutinizing its sharp metal fangs. His expression twitched. The girl's laughter before she left rang in his ears again. I will always pay attention to you, she said, don't forget. Thus, Huaishi came to a realization. He lowered his head and scrutinized the pair of ice-blue evil eyes, and his expression twitched. This was more than just paying attention. She might as well put a pair of eyes beside him. Was there such an advanced thing? But after he held the silly dog's head and scrutinized it for a long time, he couldn't see anything special about it, nor could he find any connection with Fu-Yi. Huaishur thought about it seriously for a moment, then opened her mouth and asked tentatively, "What's the matter? Hello? Are you there?" Chapter 830. Hello? Are you there? The dog's answer was, "No, Hutue." It turned out that not only was there no one inside, but he was also sprayed by the dog's lava and almost disfigured. In anger, Huaishur simply tied up the dog's mouth several times. He really didn't understand where this thing learned from. Fortunately, the dog didn't cause any trouble for Huaishur other than chewing on iron objects. The only inconvenience was that it seemed to have made up its mind to be bound to him and never leave more than 3 steps away. Even when Huaishur went to the toilet, it would cling to the cubicle and look down. A pair of majestic dog eyes witnessed Huaishur's embarrassing appearance. Huaishur was so angry that he simply put an iron eye mask on it and welded it to death. By the time Huaishur got off the express train from the border, the entire carriage was almost completely eaten up by this thing. Huaishur stood at the door. She wanted to say something but hesitated. In the end, he couldn't hold back the hope in his heart and asked Marcus, "Brother, can your post office reimburse me?" Then, it was Marcus' turn to have a wonderful expression. "Reimbursement? Do we have to reimburse this thing too? Moreover, is this considered travel expenses or hospitality expenses?" But looking at Huaishur's eyes full of expectation, he was stunned for a long time and didn't know how to refuse. His expression twitched, and he could only nod with difficulty. "I will try my best." Perhaps it was this mysterious setting that scared the higher-ups of the Mercury organization. After experiencing it firsthand, they no longer dared to send Huaishur by plane. On the road to the Pompeii space base, there was only one broken jeep that paid for its own fuel. It was a convertible. Along the way, it ate a mouthful of dust and dirt. When they reached the gate of the base, the people and dogs were covered in dust, like refugees fleeing from a famine. Marcus, who was in charge of driving, was relieved. For the first time, the experienced Roman agent felt how difficult an escort mission was. The difficult part was not to protect the target, but to protect oneself next to the target. At 2 o'clock in the morning, in the dead silent wilderness, the base was still brightly lit and people were coming and going. Marcus stopped the car and handed over the task of receiving Huaishur to the base's security chief. "Then, my mission ends here. Next, you will undergo some basic physical tests. Tomorrow morning, you can board the latest Earth-Moon space shuttle to Minerva Space Station. If you have any requests, I can relay them to you," Marcus said. "I don't have that requirement." Huaishur scratched his head and looked up at the launcher in the distance. "Just one question," he asked uncertainly. "This space shuttle of yours, is it safe?" "It's not that it's unsafe, it's a very special kind." Marcus wanted to say something but stopped on second thought. The head of security next to him replied with a serious expression, "Sir, the Kaiser 3 space shuttle has perfectly carried out more than 40 transportation and construction missions without any accidents. Please believe in our professionalism. There are absolutely no mistakes." "All right, then it's none of my business if it's gone after the 41st time. I believe in your professionalism, but you have to believe in my professionalism too." Huaishur scratched his head and felt more and more that something was wrong. When he lowered his head and looked at the obedient dog next to him with an honest and harmless smile, he finally realized what was wrong. No, wait, when they reached the stratosphere, this thing would get hungry and start tearing down the house. What the F***ck would he do then? Fu-Yi threw a friendly puppy over, directly raising the difficulty level of Huaishur's difficult task to the level of a nightmare. However, the group of people next to him didn't know the danger of this thing. When they passed by, they smiled and touched the dog's head, completely unaware that the thing they were touching was a weapon of mass destruction. It could only be said that the disguise was too perfect. Miraculously, the strict safety test for the amount of toxins per milliliter in the blood actually passed this thing. Sir, your pet is quite healthy. It seems that it will have no problem accompanying you on this space trip. The doctor rubbed the dog's head and smiled. Oh, what a cute little thing. May I ask what its name is? Huai Shi was expressionless and silent for a long time. You can call it Huai Chi. Huai Chi vegetarian dog. Kashimotoku? The doctor was enlightened. It sounds like a Ingzhou name. Yeah, who said it wasn't? Huai Shi curled the dog's teeth and said indifferently, this is probably a Shiba Inu. A Shiba Inu isn't this color, right? It has a strange disease and lacks iron. Look, it's losing its color. Huai Shi reached out and picked up the dog that had shrunk several times and was only as tall as his calf. He casually swung it twice. It's weak and sickly. Maybe it will get heatstroke, sprain its ankle, get depressed, or get injured in space. At that time, it can be used as a reserve food to realize the value of its dog life. At an angle that the doctor couldn't see, the young Bichimos raised its head and stared at him with a pair of blue eyes, baring its teeth at him. Stinky brother, go back and wait. If I don't tear down your house, I'll change my surname to yours. Ha ha ha, your relationship is really good. The doctor looked at them enviously. You must be very good to it, right? Yeah, who said I wasn't? Huai Shi hugged the dog and replied with a smile, you see, I like it very much. In his arms, the dog opened its mouth and suddenly bit his arm, biting it hard. Huai Shi's smile twitched. He pinched the dog's head and hugged it even tighter. They became even more intimate. Such happy days would never end. The next day, early morning, Huai Shi, who had only slept for 3 hours, got up, put on the spacesuit layer by layer, and put on the helmet. Even if it was compressed repeatedly with the most advanced technology in Rome, the spacesuit was still cumbersome. Its weight was like a full body of iron armor, making it extremely slow and difficult to move. Even the dog had a full body of it. Wearing this suit, Huai Shi's skills were equivalent to being half-crippled. Moreover, with 5 thick fingers, he might not even be able to hold a sword steadily. But there was nothing he could do if he didn't wear it. If something went wrong, he would die. He wasn't strong enough to reason with the universe's vacuum, let alone the terrifying low temperature and rays. He hadn't reached the 4th level and completed the complete transformation of his body into origin form. At most, he relied on the mountain ghost's talent to last a bit longer than normal people. But before that, the pressure in his body would explode like a deep-sea fish rapidly rising to the surface. For Ascenders, space was still a hopeless situation. Otherwise, there wouldn't be a lunar prison. Even today, it was still a place where the Astronomy Association imprisoned felons. Because of the huge threat to the world, they couldn't be kept, but because of their own talent or other value, they couldn't be killed. They couldn't be thrown into hell, and they couldn't be kept in the present world. Then, they could only be thrown to the dark side of the moon, where the Earth couldn't be seen for tens of thousands of years, quietly waiting for the day when they could be used again as a tool. Huai Shi had once discussed with Ai Qing whether or not the general would be sent there. But in view of the general's cooperation during the arrest process and various considerations, he was only thrown into the trench prison and isolated under the pressure of the bottomless abyss. And there was more than just a prison on the moon. It was also full of large and small laboratories and research bases for all kinds of key research that was not suitable to be carried out in the present world and couldn't be placed in the border or hell. Now, basically every inch of the place had been filled with flags from the 5 permanent. Although it was true that the place belonged to all mankind, you had to be able to go up, right? Otherwise, what was the difference between the land on the moon and the profits of ordinary shareholders in the stock market? It was just something that existed in theory. Now, at this moment, just outside Pompeii City, on the volcano, the launch pad set up in the crater of the volcano was a countdown from the launch center. The surrounding heat was rapidly gathering, causing the solidified lava in the crater of the volcano to begin to melt again, bursting into a blazing light. As early as at the beginning of the design of the launch base, this volcano was included in the consideration. Everything was to effectively use the law of conversion of geothermal heat to save fuel for the first stage, making the launch process more convenient. Now, Huai Shi was sitting in the back seat, watching the operations of the pilots in front of him. After he looked away, he stared at the broken dog next to him. He was supervising it so that it didn't rush up to take a bite of whatever was delicious on the spaceship. The bulkhead was so thin. If it was chewed through, everyone would be finished. On the chair specially prepared for transporting animals, the broken dog seemed to not understand what was happening at all. It bent down, raised its hind legs, and swung and rotated like a tornado, trying to scratch its itchy ears through the helmet. There was only the sound of a clapping sound echoing in the countdown. The moment the number 0 appeared, Huai Shi's vision went black. He felt hundreds of his own weight being exerted on his body, almost embedded in the chair. With the loud sound of the jet, the terrifying acceleration began. Countless noises converged from all directions. The sound of the engine trembling, the sound of the fuel tumbling, the faint vibration when the heat-resistant tiles gradually cracked and burned red, and even the low sound of every piece of iron and screw bursting out. They converged in one place, turned into a tide, and passed into Huai Shi's hands through the protective suit. It made his perceptive eyes appear like invisible eyes, spreading out along with the touch of object. He felt the billowing air waves when the air was ignited, and the roaring sound of the hurricane. His consciousness was running on the steel, looking down, and he felt the earth was rapidly moving away. At that moment, Huai Shi opened his eyes. Through the complicated steel structure, he caught a glimpse of the blue sky in front of him, and even the original darkness of the universe behind him. Between the dusky heaven and earth, behind the thick layers of clouds, in the oppressive leaden darkness, a burning red light suddenly appeared, igniting the darkness. It wantonly stretched up, forward, and outlined a blazing trail. It was as if it wanted to ignite all of this. It tore apart all blockades, climbed high, and moved between heaven and earth. It was moving toward outer space with the body of a human. He drove steel, broke through the kingdom that once belonged to the gods, and left everything on earth behind. He was flying. Chapter 831. The stars shone, but the sun could not be seen. This world seemed to be eternally quiet. The earth was shaking. Countless dust particles were lifted up silently, reflecting the light of the fire as they danced silently in the darkness. Above the huge building, white fog formed by countless air leaks quickly spewed out and flew into the vacuum, causing a terrible cold to enter the room. They exchanged what they needed. They looked like big-headed dolls running on the barren land. Those figures were shrouded in bulky gray spacesuit. They held specially modified guns and weapons in their hands and pulled the trigger at the guards behind the crack. In the low-gravity vacuum, they nimbly jumped on the ground, silently bringing death to the enemy and silently welcoming their own death. Broken sounds and shouts could be heard. At the moment when the physical signs of death were confirmed, flames would engulf everything from the inside out. Eventually, even the spacesuits would be degraded under alchemy and melted into the dust. Only a wisp of flying ash was left. In the fierce exchange of fire, the alarms inside the lunar prison rang one after another. The first thing the security director did was to press the red button in front of him, causing the three dangerous areas A1, B1, C1 to close the gates, and forcibly sealing the prisoners and guards inside together with an order that could not be disobeyed. The identities of those prisoners were too sensitive, and the value they represented was too precious. They could not be killed, but they could not be allowed to leave. They could only be isolated in the most thorough way. Once the alarm was sounded, everything inside would instantly freeze into a piece of foam that spewed out. Before that, everyone would fall into a deep sleep, whether physically or spiritually, everything would be stagnant. Under low-temperature sleep, their bodies could last for more than 72 hours. The frozen foam would maintain a hardness greater than steel and connect with the entire bottom layer of the prison. Unless the entire lunar prison was blown up, no one would be able to take anything from it. The only liquid that could dissolve this substance was kept in the present world in London. The moment the button was pressed, the search and rescue team would begin to prepare to set off. If they could not arrive in 72 hours, all the prisoners and staff inside would face death. But even if the value was buried in the eternal cold soil of the lunar surface, no one would be allowed to take it away. But now, the foam that spewed out was not able to cover everything. In the main control room, the head of security raised his eyes and saw that the pale foam in the B1 layer was rapidly dissolving. In the end, only white ash was left. Instead, they sealed off the entrance and cut off all reinforcements. In the underground detention facility, an endless stream of invaders appeared in front of the camera and killed all who stood in their way. They were prepared for all kinds of defensive measures. This was a long-planned prison break. Ignoring the more precious targets on both sides, they stepped forward and walked straight to the edge of the corridor without any hesitation. He used the most violent method to break the external force field, and then skillfully used the myriad dissolving agent to melt the iron door in front of him. Let the prisoners, who are bound by layers, emerge from the darkness. *********** 1-8771 The old man with thinning hair was imprisoned in the restraints that made him look like a mental patient. He raised his head and grinned mockingly at the surveillance camera. Saliva dripped from the corners of his open lips, but his teeth were covered in a layer of crystal-like radiance. Faint symbols appeared. Without the attacker's help, the shackles on his body were easily removed. It was as if he was shaking off dust. He regained his freedom. Just like that, he casually walked out of the cage that had imprisoned him for 30 years. He stretched his back in satisfaction, turned around, and said something to the invader. Then, he saw a pitch-black handgun being raised. It was aimed at his forehead. The old man was stunned for a moment. He could not see the attacker's expression behind the pitch-black mask, and he did not say anything. He just coldly pulled the trigger and broke the bowl of life, causing the scarlet blood in the skull to splash out. The old man fell to the ground in a daze. Until he died, his face was blank. Then, the leader of the attackers aimed the gun at the old man's head, heart, and other vital points and pulled the trigger again and again. Until the bullets were empty, he confirmed that the old man's remaining breath was cut off. The cursed bullets instantly contaminated all the source substances, causing the soul to shatter and decay. In the end, the attacker reloaded a new magazine, turned the muzzle, and aimed it at his subordinate. One by one, the traces of their movements were erased. In the end, he was the only one left. In front of the surveillance camera, he burned into a pile of black ash from the inside out. The attack ended in an instant. They did not think about taking the prisoner from inside, nor did they think about how to withdraw from inside. After erasing all traces, including themselves, only a tragic result was left. Before the internal guards were dispatched, everything was over. Just as Huaishur arrived at the Mitra space station, in the outer layer of the lunar prison, the Alpha Zone, prisoner number B1-8771, the Grand Master Publius Augustus stopped breathing. Harming the 3 great blockades, violating 16 taboos of the Stone Cauldron Institution, committing hundreds of crimes, and causing the deaths of tens of thousands of people, Alchemist was suddenly met with death after struggling at death's door for 30 years. And on the space station thousands of miles above the ground, Huaishur leaned in front of the window, looking down at the rising flames in the dark, and could not help but exclaim in admiration, "Wow, you people from the moon are really romantic." You even set off fireworks during the holidays? 30 minutes ago. On the Mitra space station, the Earth-Moon Space Research Base in Rome, in the circular gravity simulation area, Huaishur met the station master, a middle-aged scholar who did not smile much. As the host, he invited this rare visitor for dinner, the standard liquid food of the space station. In accordance with the commission of the Helios workshop, in an hour, we will send you to the ground station when we pass the area around the Kepler crater. After that, you will set off with the alchemists of the Stoneforge Institute. If you need any help, please do not hesitate to ask. As long as I have enough to eat and drink. Huaishur sucked on the paste-like food in the bag and stared at the dark space and the moon that were constantly rotating outside the porthole. But I have a question that I don't understand. Was it always so troublesome to go to Helios before? Do we have to travel so far? No, it is also the first time for us to transport qualified people to Helios, the station master replied. In the past, it was the Helios that went directly to the present to receive passengers, but this time, for some reason, it did not approach the Earth-Moon system. Instead, through the previous contract with the Stoneforge Institute, the transportation work was transferred to the major lineages. As for the details, I'm not sure. You can ask the staff of the Stone Cauldron Society when you reach the moon. As far as I know, the person leading the team this time is Mr. Grand Master Garland. He should know more. You mean Garland Ian? Huaishur's movements paused for a moment, somewhat unexpected. Grand Master Garland, the oldest and most influential alchemist in the present world, was a senior member of the Stoneforge Institute, and was also a pillar of the academic world. He deserved to be called the pinnacle of transformation studies in alchemy. Even Grand Master Mikhail was several generations behind him. Before Mikhail's teacher joined the institute, Mr. Garland was already a Grand Master. Because of his lofty status, alchemists respectfully called him Garland Ian. Almost all the existing alchemists had come into contact with and learned from this old man's theories and technique. So far, no one had been able to reach the same height as him. This suddenly put a lot of pressure on Huaishur. To have such a famous person lead the team, the difficulty of Helios's commission this time was probably not ordinary. For a metal alchemist like Huaishur, who could only rely on his sole ability in addition to his power as a forger, he might not even be able to get in line to carry a bag next to Garland Ian. For a moment, he felt a headache coming on. With such a big shot around, it would not be good to fish in troubled waters. Huaishur pinched his chin and fell into deep thought. He was already thinking about the reflection crystals on Helios. If there was really no other way, he was afraid that he could only do what Russell said and do it. They were all teachers from the ivory tower. Could it be that Russell could touch the crystals on your car, but I, Page, could not? Just as he was contemplating his big plan of breaking the law, he heard a disturbance in the rotating gravity cabin. Countless people rushed out from the corners, valiant and high-spirited. A high-pitched voice sounded. It was as if someone had blown a heavy horn in space. There was the sound of drums from the broadcast. Everyone was roaring excitedly. Huaishur looked up and was dumbfounded. Right in front of him, the station master had already taken off his cumbersome jacket and trousers and opened his arms. The staff members rushed up and surrounded him. Their hands didn't stop moving as they helped him put on a ring armor, a battle skirt, a bright red helmet, a cape, a scepter, and a sword. When the group of people dispersed, the gentle and serious scholar in front of Huaishur had turned into a majestic captain with angry eyes. "What are you doing?" Huaishur subconsciously leaned back strategically, looked around, and widened his eyes. "The Romans want to kill me." Immediately after, the stationmaster said, "Sorry, excuse me for a moment." He raised the sword in his hand and said fiercely, "Rome needs me. The people need me." Immediately, hundreds of astronauts dressed as Roman soldiers raised their hands and roared enthusiastically. It was as if they were going to war. No, that excited look. It was as if they were celebrating a festival. In the monitoring room, in front of the observation system, the navigator shouted at the top of his voice. The enemy is 400 kilometers away. 350 kilometers, everyone, get ready. Therefore, in an instant, the crowd rushed to the edge of the circular gravity simulator and stood in front of the huge floor-to-ceiling window facing space. They roared at the shining steel star in the distance. Even if the vacuum could not transmit sound. Just opposite Mitra space station, in the distant darkness, another huge square space station slowly appeared with the American flag. The rapidly enlarged image was projected on the glass as if it was quickly zooming in. Just behind the armor plate that slowly opened, there was also a floor-to-ceiling window. Countless figures appeared under the light. Everyone held their breath as their faces turned red. The war was about to begin. In the silence, Huai was stunned as he picked up the watermelon jelly in the plastic bag. Melon. What is this? Chapter 832. At this moment, on the moon, in the vast space, as the orbits overlapped, the two space stations, Mitra and Liberty Goddess, reunited in this barren void after half a year. Even at their closest, the distance was more than 200 kilometers. When the armor of each other opened and gradually moved closer, everyone's expression was excited, as if they were about to welcome a war. Indeed, it was a war, no mistake, when the scene behind the opposite porthole was projected in front of Huaishi's eyes. He was dumbfounded. Hundreds of burly men had their faces smeared with paint. Their hair was either tied up or shaved. Their upper bodies were naked, revealing countless fierce paint and body hair. They held mop sticks or spears and battle axes that were temporarily modified from steel. Their eyes were wide open as they roared at the Romans in the opposite space station, under the lead of the station head at the front. The electrical signal from space transmitted the vast and mighty voice without reservation. The leader at the front even held a chicken in his hand and chopped it on the spot. He smeared the chicken's blood on his face and shouted loudly at the Romans in the opposite space station. Then, the 100-man phalanx of Roman infantry also began to demonstrate and retaliate. They shouted in unison, "Rome and Caesar." Then, they raised their heads and sang a military song. For a moment, the voices from each other echoed in the communication between the two sides. Separated by a distance of 200 kilometers, the staff of the two scientific observation space stations greeted the long-awaited voyagers. Until a short 3 minutes passed in an instant. The two sides crossed each other in orbit. At the last moment, the station heads of both sides waved goodbye and agreed to meet again in half a year. Then, the soldiers who were so powerful just now began to busy cleaning up the trash and things that fell on the ground in the cabin. Huai was stunned the whole time. He slurped the already empty watermelon jelly in his mouth. "I'm sorry for making you laugh. We rarely see outsiders when we're traveling in space. Sometimes, when we encounter something, we get overly excited." The station head took off his helmet and proudly explained to Huai, "But those Americans lost again. How can that kind of cosplay compare to our real thing? The champion of this year's Space Warrior Cup will be ours." "Amazing, you still have a competition." "That's right. It's an annual competition sponsored by Egypt's Bast Space Station, and the award is given by the International Space Council. It's an honor for every astronaut." "Don't you think it's a bit too much to ask for a trophy when you're playing a space role?" Huai could only clap in admiration after hearing this. "You guys still know how to play." But he had to know how to play in this dormitory, where everyone generally squeezed into 20 people a year. They had to line up to use the toilet, and the bathwater had to be recycled. If you didn't know how to play, you would have driven yourself crazy by looking at a pile of instruments and data every day. It was just seeking joy in the midst of bitterness. There was no happy drink, no privacy, and no porn. Hundreds of people were living in a metal box. There was an endless amount of work and data. Even the otaku who was unwilling to go out would not be able to take it. Even the development of hell was better than this job. At the very least, he could go out. If they went out in this place, they would die if they ran out of oxygen. The void of the universe was too vast. Even if it was just a round trip between the Earth-Moon system, it was still long enough to make one feel numb. In comparison, everyone was just an ant curled up in a box. They didn't immerse themselves in sadness for too long. Just as the space station was about to turn over the dark side of the moon, in the projection from the outside world, everyone saw that at the end of the moon's surface, on the eternally pale land, a slender beam of light suddenly rose. It was like a sharp iron needle piercing from the inside out, piercing the moon's shell and pointing to the scene. "What's that?" Huaisher scratched his head and took a look. "Fireworks? Celebrating on the moon?" "That's a level 2 emergency alert, sir." The station chief's expression became serious. "Something might have happened at the prison. It's reminding everyone to be on guard against jailbreakers." Jailbreak? Huaisher was stunned for a long time. It was hard to imagine. In this place, buried deep under the moon, where one would suffocate to death once the oxygen was cut off, there was actually someone who could escape? This was not a place where one could just grab a set of protective clothing and run away. Ignoring the heavy internal defense, just the harsh situation on the outside was enough to make any jailbreakers feel despair. The uninhabited area of thousands of kilometers was enough to trap all jailbreakers. Hypothermia, death. Suffocation, death. Starvation, death, and the nearest supply station was 2,100 kilometers away. The mathematicians used precise calculations to ensure the monthly supply, down to every mouthful of starch and every screw. Since the construction of the lunar prison, a total of 4 level 5 ascendants had served their sentences there. There were also countless scholars and alchemists, and even creators and grandmasters. Not a single person was able to leave. In the above special cases, no one even waited until the day they were released. "Mr. Huaisher, I'm afraid your journey will be affected." After the station chief put down the communicator, he brought bad news. Now, all takeoffs on the moon require the approval of the management committee. Our spacecraft have a mission, and I'm afraid it will be difficult to send you down without permission. We have confirmed from the Kepler Valley base that all their vehicles must take off within 2 hours. Otherwise, they will have to stay and cooperate with the investigation. He paused and looked at him sympathetically. "In other words, if we wait for the committee to approve our landing and takeoff, you may not be able to catch up with the Stoneware Institution's ship." "Then what should I do?" Huaisher was dumbfounded. He lowered his head and looked at his phone. The scheduled itinerary was stuck. There were still 2 hours. It should have been enough time for Huaisher to land, pass the verification, and meet up with the Stoneware Institution's people to leave calmly. This was simply an unexpected disaster. Someone had escaped from the dark side prison. With a flap of his little wings, all the takeoffs and landings on the moon were disrupted. Kepler Base's ship was allowed to take off because the Stoneware Institution's reputation was big enough. Moreover, they were almost on the other side of the moon. The jailbreakers would not be able to cross such a long distance in a short time. That's the problem. The station chief's expression became awkward. "Although the spacecraft can't take off and land, we have an airdrop chamber for drones to sample." He coughed dryly and said apologetically, "If you don't mind, you can actually make do with it." This suggestion was actually not very reliable. If Huaisher was not a famous ascendant, he probably would not have even mentioned it. This was no different from putting a person into a torpedo and launching it. It was something that could not be returned after being thrown out. The airdrop chamber for drones was originally a one-time consumable. It was used to detect large meteorites, as well as a tool for rock sampling and analysis. It still carried a landing device and buffer equipment to ensure the drone's integrity, but it would not have the fuel to escape the moon's gravity and fly back. Otherwise, it would not be able to bypass the Moon's current takeoff control. In addition, the only vehicle that could transport people in the Minerva space station was the space shuttle used for scheduled transportation and resupply. Who knew how long the Moon's flight control would be maintained? Space travel was not a walk in the park. If that thing was not allowed to take off after landing, the Minerva space station's operations would be affected. In the worst-case scenario, they might even run out of food. Therefore, when the station chief was faced with a choice between letting down the crew or letting down Huaishur, he could only choose between letting down his little brother who was hitching a ride. As for Huaishur, after carefully understanding the situation, she also felt that this was a good idea. "This airdrop chamber of yours." Huaishur rubbed his chin and asked tentatively, "Is it safe?" The airdrop chamber is the same configuration as the Minerva space station's escape capsule. It's even more spacious and safe. After all, even a consumable drone is much more precious than a human body. Sounds like it can be used. Huaishur immediately breathed a sigh of relief. Just don't blow it up halfway. Isn't it just an unlicensed vehicle? It's not like I haven't been in one before. He didn't even wear a seatbelt on Raymond's truck. It was fine as long as it could send him down. It was better than standing here and waiting for the bus to arrive. After receiving Huaishur's approval, the station chief immediately breathed a sigh of relief, but he also felt more guilty. 15 minutes later, the outer layer worked overtime. On the launch platform of the airdrop chamber, Huaishur saw the prepared vehicle and all the tools prepared for him. It included 3 layers of impact protection, enough compressed food to last more than 2 days, and enough water to last a week. When necessary, it could be used as a consumable for oxygen production. A small cushioning device nested inside the airdrop chamber. A specially modified pistol that could be used in a vacuum. A magazine of alchemy bullet. A radio station for emergency communications. A human source supply, a medical kit, and even a maintenance box filled with a set of maintenance tools. There was even a set of eye-catching bright red spacesuits for the search and rescue team to look for in case of an accident. There was also a liquid cushioning suit with the highest safety specifications. Even the dogs had a set. There's no need for so much. Huaishur looked at himself being wrapped into a ball and was dumbfounded. There's no way I can carry so many things. If you can't carry them, just leave them where they are. Isn't littering prohibited on the Moon? It's fine. We'll pay for the subsequent recovery and cleanup work, the station chief said straightforwardly. These are all necessary reserves. Seeing their serious and careful expressions, Huaishur even began to wonder if these people were more nervous than he was. The station chief seemed to see his doubts and asked, "Mr. Huaishur, this might be your first time working in outer space, right? As researchers, we don't have anything to guide sublimators, but if it's survival experience, there's still some room to speak." He said solemnly, "Let me give you a piece of advice. Here, you must be prepared for the worst. You must be 10 times more prepared. Waste has never been a problem. The problem is that you don't even have the chance to waste. This is a desperate situation where you can't survive without your tools," he said to the man in front of him. He told the man in front of him, "Under any circumstances, you must be able to ensure that you can survive until the rescue team arrives." Just like that, he tightened the belt on Huaishur's body and hung the pistol in the outer backpack. A place that was convenient to access at any time. After the third inspection of the airdrop chamber, the station chief took a step back and waved goodbye to Huaishur. "I sincerely hope that we can meet again on your return journey," he said. "Goodbye, Mr. Huaishur." Along with the countdown, the airdrop chamber suddenly shook and slid outward along the orbit. Finally, it left the space station. Under the acceleration of the ejection, it fell toward the eternal pale alien planet below. There was no friction from the atmosphere, no air resistance, no violent tremors, and no abnormalities. Only the gradual increase of gravity in the distance told Huai that he was falling. It was at that moment that his vision went black and he felt a chill. A premonition of death burst forth. Because in the dark universe in the distance, an icy glow lit up. It was like a star was striking. Chapter 833. At the same time, an ear-piercing alarm sounded from Mitra space station. In the blink of an eye, the screen turned red. As the radio waves spread and reflected, the originally empty screen was suddenly filled with countless tiny dots of light. What is this? The station commander's eyes widened. Missiles! No, much smaller than missiles. The material analysis is out. Weight, iron, nickel, and silicon. The observer glanced at the report on the top right in disbelief. This is a meteorite? A small meteorite cluster. In that instant, the entire Mitra space station shook violently. The B4 solar array lost its signal. Then, the recirculation chamber's alarm sounded. Before that, the emergency evacuation program had already been activated. Countless people ran in a hurry. The station commander turned back and roared with all his might, "Force field! Where's the force field generator?" Because of the airborne ejection, it's temporarily shut down. The operator's face was pale. It's still warming up. Commander, 5 seconds, just 5 seconds. 5 seconds, who knew what would happen in 5 seconds? And the most important question now was, what about the airborne chamber? On the screen, Mitra's server had already calculated the meteorite cluster's orbit and size. It was no different from other meteorites. After being captured by the moon's gravity, it was approaching the moon. It was estimated that after one round, it would fall into the Shanghai region. But the question was, why didn't the radar alert them before? Only when it was 5 kilometers away did it react. 5 kilometers to the people on Earth was very far, but to the reaction time in space, it was close at hand, imminent. Mitra space station was just at the edge of the meteorite cluster's orbit, and the airborne chamber was being thrown down. In an instant, the server finished calculating. The airborne chamber was now blocking the meteorite cluster's path. Mr. Huai, can you hear me? Please reply. The station commander pulled at the communicator and kept repeating, "Emergency, please immediately activate the auxiliary propulsion engine, please immediately evade." No one replied. The station commander turned back and looked at the communications manager. The manager shook his head. "There's radio interference during the descent, we can't do anything remotely." In the violent tremor, the entire circular space station was like a lotus leaf in the rain, constantly shaking. Countless solar arrays fell off and flew silently in the dark vacuum. It was like the scales of an Ouroboros. Soon, under the scholar's control, a transparent layer of repulsive force shielded the space station, causing dazzling light spots and ripples to burst out in the void. That was the impact of iron and stone. "We need to increase our altitude. Mitra space station is too big of a target." The observer turned back and reported, "Sir, we need to avoid danger." The station master was silent for a moment before he closed his eyes with difficulty. On his chest there was a sacred emblem of Mercury. She prayed that Huai was safe and sound. At that moment, the 16 engine nozzles burst into flames at the same time, pushing the Mercury space station towards a higher orbit. More meteorite showers had already rushed into the orbit of the moon. Under the surveillance of the camera, the airborne pod was shaking violently. Suddenly, a ball of fire burst out. The world was spinning. Huai's vision went black, and then he felt a violent tremor. It was as if someone had suddenly punched him. That kind of illusory pain came from within his body. It was not an illusion, but a resonance from Supreme. When the premonition of death first appeared, he even thought that the Romans wanted to blow him up on the airborne pod. But as the resonance and Supreme spread, the entire pod was within his perception, and he felt an endless stream of impact on the pod. In the ear-piercing alarm, his eyes were flashing scarlet. His eyes were bleeding. It was as if he was floating in the dark space, being attacked by countless enemies. There was no need for a huge body to collide. The accumulated energy from the long journey in space was enough to destroy everything with small meteorites. Even a meteorite the size of a pinky joint would cause irreparable damage to the pod. But what the F***ck was this? Why sure could not even bring himself and his dog. What the hell? What was going on? Why was there a problem all of a sudden? Wasn't there nothing happening during the journey? Could it be that Mitra space station's luck was too thick to kill, but the production date of the pod was not too good, and the 8 characters were not hard enough? How small was the probability of encountering such a **TTY thing? It should be noted that more than 99% of the universe outside of Earth, which could even extend to tens or hundreds of decimal places, did not have any matter. In the vast void of the universe, an airborne pod encountered a group of meteorites? The probability was even more exaggerated than winning the lottery 10 times in a row. This was under the premise that no one could ever win the first prize in the sports lottery. But what was going on now? Thankfully, amidst the countless radio waves, he heard a vague voice from the space station. Please speak. Assist. Engine. Without caring about following the instruction manual, Huaishe raised his hand and smashed the only button beside him. But it was useless. At the same time, the entire pod shook again. Huaishe's blood instantly rushed to his head, and the pod cover above his head disappeared in an instant. It was as if a knife had cut open a tragic gap. Under the impact of another meteorite, the pod was severely damaged, and then the entire shuttle-shaped pod spun violently. The alarm of the operating program sounded again in the channel. It was as if a fighter jet had stalled. Huaishe did not know what professional terms to use, but the moment his heart sank to the bottom, he heard Tanguy sigh. In an instant, hope was reignited. Tanguy, save me! Idiot, what's the use of calling me now? Tanguy became more and more helpless. I don't know how to operate this thing. Then why are you sighing? I'm just waiting to see when you'll remember. Tanguy sighed softly. Huaishe was about to die from anxiety. Remember what? Tanguy rolled her eyes. Of course, remember that Osiris's main control intelligence is in your trouser pocket. At that moment, Huaishe felt as if he had been granted amnesty. He frantically fumbled around the outermost saddlebag and pulled out the impatient Lord of the Flies. Don't pull a dream, give me a hand. Hutue, scumbag. In the Book of Steel, Beelzebub spat. When he used it, he called it Little Sweetheart. When he didn't use it, he stuffed it into his trouser pocket. He even F***king cut off the Wi-Fi. Even so, Beelzebub did not have time to dawdle at this critical moment. The moment the Book of Steel appeared, it disintegrated on its own. Countless cables and plugs flew out from the pages of the book, piercing into every corner of the entire airdrop cabin. In less than a second, the entire system was under control. Then, it frantically extracted Huaishe's origin substance and replenished it. After forcefully repairing and awakening the engine system, it spewed out blazing flames. Amidst the countless flying meteorites, the capsule, which was like a withered flower, suddenly shook. The engine started, and a huge thrust burst out of nowhere. It quickly pushed Huaishe towards the ground. However, under the impact of countless meteorites, the capsule's outer shell kept peeling off. Sparks flew as it spun violently. Even though it escaped from the front track, under the attack of the aftershocks, it was still difficult to control its trajectory. In the end, it was too late. The conditions were limited. If this was a space shuttle, Beelzebub could drive it and drift among the meteorite. However, a capsule with limited fuel really did not have much room to display his skills. He could only barely maintain it. At that moment, Huaishe saw the moon's surface through the crack at the top. It was like an illusion, as if he saw ripples spreading in the sea. Deep waves appeared in the eternal silvery white. Then, countless grayish-white motes rose into the air, pulled and gathered by an invisible force. In the end, it actually formed a huge lifelike palm. Its 5 fingers spread out as if it was wearing a ring. It aimed at the capsule from afar. The 5 fingers drew in the air, leaving a trace of origin substance. It was an alchemy array that instantly unfolded. In an instant, an invisible gravitational force burst out, pulling the capsule towards its palm. Meanwhile, rays of light flew out from its slightly spinning pinky. Against gravity, they flew into space, shattering the large meteorites that were rushing towards the capsule. Then, he guided the descending warehouse into the palm of his hand. Someone made a move. However, as the distance between the two got closer and closer, Huai Shi did not even have time to breathe a sigh of relief before he saw a meteorite flying from the side hit the tip of its index finger, causing the finger to instantly twist and break. The capsule that fell into its palm actually leaked out. With a terrifying momentum, it swooped down and smashed towards the surface of the moon that had been silent since ancient times. A comet crashed into the earth. At the last moment, Beelzebub's pages violently flipped, causing Osiris's huge shadow to envelop the capsule that was riddled with holes. Countless illusory engine nozzles aimed at the ground in front of them. An illusory rainbow burst out. The remaining power of the Hell Destroyer only lasted for a moment. Cut off most of the inertia. Then, the capsule rolled and fell to the ground. It bounced violently, bursting into flames, shattering into pieces, scattering debris all over the ground. An orange-yellow cushion ball rolled out from inside. It was cut open, and the honeycomb-like inner layer was exposed. Finally, the sublimator in the red spacesuit slid out. He lay on the ground of the alien planet. Huai Shi turned over with difficulty and lay among the flying moon dust. He saw the eternal darkness of space and the azure planet hanging under the sun. Amidst the alarm of the oxygen leak in the capsule, Huai Shi could not help but want to lift his mask and smoke a cigarette to calm himself down. He was still alive. But someone wanted him dead. Why? Chapter 834. Don't Panic. At this moment, Huai Shi was lying on the moon, looking up at Earth and talking to himself. His head was buzzing and his vision was dark. It might be internal bleeding. But it didn't matter. Let's make a conclusion first. Huai Shi, male, 18.5 years old, a happy young man who was fishing and practicing in Donbua, suddenly received an invitation to go to the Helios workshop. Just like that, you went to Rome, met friends, took the dog to the sky, and came to the space station. Unfortunately, you encountered a prison break that hadn't happened in decades and needed to be forced to land. Then, you encountered a meteorite shower that hadn't happened in thousands of years. You almost smashed into the ground with the airborne capsule and became a pile of scrap metal. There was no doubt that this was definitely not a coincidence. Someone wants to kill you. Tanguy went straight to the point and said the conclusion for him. I think, compared to a pure coincidence, this possibility is more convincing. Is there no other possibility? Huai Shi asked. Think on the bright side, maybe you're especially unlucky, right? Tanguy laughed. But when have you not accidentally stepped into someone's trap when you were unlucky? Huai Shi raised his hand and slapped his round mask hard. He was full of grief and anger. In the realm, someone wanted to mess with him. In hell, someone wanted to mess with him. I'm already in the sky, why is there still someone who wants to mess with me? For what? Huai Shi wanted to hold his chin and think, but he couldn't touch it through the mask. This time, he didn't need Tanguy to come to a conclusion. There was no doubt that someone didn't want him to reach the Helios workshop. Someone wanted him to have an accident on the way. If it really didn't work, it didn't matter if he died. If Huai Shi stayed at Mitra Space Station and waited for the Moon Management Committee's permission to take off and land, he might not have encountered these troubles. But once he left the space station, he immediately encountered the crisis of death. But why didn't he encounter any problems when Pompey took off? If they wanted to kill him, it would have been more convenient, right? Even the slightest mishap during liftoff would cause Huai to die in the fuel explosion. Perhaps it was because they were still in the core of the reality realm at that time, so it was inconvenient to do anything? Or was it that the distance was too far, and it was beyond his reach? If that was the case, the person who wanted to kill him was most likely on the moon right now. He wasn't out of danger yet. And where is my dog? Huai finally remembered. He stood up abruptly and looked around at the barren ground. Please don't let anything happen to him. Otherwise, the puppy of friendship would be buried on the moon. Then, he saw a dog get up from not far away and walk slowly towards the wreckage of the airborne capsule. He buried his head in the ground and rummaged through the broken frame. Huai didn't even have time to call it back. In the distance, a spark suddenly burst out from the wreckage of the airborne capsule, igniting the rapidly leaking oxygen. The blazing flames immediately rose. Along with the air waves that dissipated in the vacuum, they blew in all directions. Huai's heart turned cold. It was over. The puppy of friendship was dead. Before he could put his hands together and hope that the dog was fine, he saw the flames dance and quickly lined up to both sides, like the return of a king. A husky walked out with its head held high. Its hair was not messy at all, and it was full of energy. It even threw off its broken hood. It grinned in the vacuum and glanced at the stunned Huai in front of it with disdain. It was alive and kicking, without the painful convulsions of ordinary creatures in the vacuum. It even sneezed and swung its saliva as if nothing had happened. At best, it was just not used to the smell. What kind of super creature was this? Huai walked around the dog 3 times, looking left and right. He raised his hand and scratched his head. He realized that he was really not as good as a dog then. After the dog had pretended to be cool enough, it finally lowered its head, opened its mouth, and threw the thing it took out from the wreckage of the airborne capsule at Huai's feet. It then raised its head and glanced at him with pity. It had a mocking expression that said, "What would you do without me?" Huai's expression twitched, and he bent down to pick up the thing. He found that it was the thing he had just thrown out in the turbulence, the iron ball beacon given by the Helios workshop. Now, that thing was actually operating on its own. It felt hot. Layers of nested complex structures unfolded on their own, and a beam of light emerged from it, outlining a blurry projection of an old man. It gradually became clear, revealing a resolute and cold face. It raised its eyes and looked at him. Galander. Huai subconsciously straightened his body. Then, an unfamiliar voice sounded directly from his soul. "Are you still alive?" The old man nodded and seemed to be relieved. Huai recalled the giant silver hand formed by the moon dust just now and suddenly realized, was it you who helped just now? As a great master in alchemy who was proficient in conversion chemistry, source matter, and fusion, he actually helped him on the moon from such a long distance away. This level of attainment had reached a miraculous level and was amazing. As expected of a great master. "You don't have to thank me. It was the station master of Mitra Space Station who contacted me. Only then did I know what happened." Galander told him, "In the end it wasn't of much use, but it's good that you're safe and sound." After a short communication, Huai finally connected to the Kepler base's channel. Unfortunately, due to the accident caused by this wave of impact, although he successfully landed on the ground, he was more than 200 kilometers away from his scheduled location. He landed in the no-man's land. He was going to be late. "Don't worry," Galander said. "I've already informed the management of the Kepler base, and the search and rescue team is on their way to your place." "No, there's no need for a search and rescue team." Huai thought for a moment and said seriously, "I'll arrive at the Kepler Valley base before I take off." "There won't be any accidents, Mr. Galander," he said. "There won't be any accidents." The old man seemed to be stunned for a moment, and his expression became serious. Don't try to be brave. Under the helmet, Huaisher smiled. After a short silence, Galander seemed to understand something and nodded. Then, I'll wait for you before the scheduled departure time, he said. I hope you can make it. The communication was cut off, and the beam of light shrunk back into the rapidly closing beacon. Huaisher threw it into his pocket. Okay, now he was done bragging. It was time to think about how to make it happen. Through the helmet, Beelzebub sensed his dangerous gaze. Instantly, the steel page trembled. No more, no more. There's really not a single drop left. Even if you ask me to change it for you, I won't be able to change anything. What a joke. Summoning Osiris Afterimage had almost drained all of Huaisher's source substance. Moreover, without a physical body, it was like trying to fly with an airplane blueprint. It was unrealistic. Look at you. You make it sound like I forced you to do something. Huaisher looked helpless after being misunderstood. He could not help but sigh. Haha, do you think I don't know you? An emoticon of rolling eyes appeared on Beelzebub's cover. Friendly reminder, Big Brother, you only have 3 hours of oxygen left. Why don't we stop building and call for help obediently? Isn't that better than anything else? Don't worry. I already have an idea. Huaisher lowered her head, looked around, and began to rack her brain. He looked for anything that could be used. Well, things were scattered all over the toolbox. A bunch of cables. Then, he found an iron rod. From the wreckage of the airborne capsule, he found 3 wheels of the airborne capsule that were used for sliding, as well as a frame whose purpose was unknown but was completely twisted. He also found a large enough iron plate. After collecting 2 welding rods and a welding torch, Zhang Zian began to work. Huaisher turned around and looked at the dog that was jumping around happily in the pile of trash. He showed a gentle smile that had never been seen before. Come, brother dog. He hid the noose made of cables behind his back and called softly, I have something good for you, Kong Kong. We shouldn't have waited for the thugs from the Astronomical Association. In the lounge, a middle-aged man wrapped in a blanket said angrily, It's no longer safe on the moon. We should take off immediately. Otherwise, if something were to happen... That's enough, Rachel. The man smoking a cigar on the sofa said, This is Galandon's decision. You can question it, but you must obey. Rachel's expression stiffened for a moment, and then became gloomier. You were never attacked at all. Of course, you don't need my reassurance. You think I'm dreaming, right? Relax, Rachel. The man smoking the cigar sighed. Don't worry. You're safe here. Rachel sneered and wanted to retort, but in the end, he didn't say anything. After muttering something in a low voice, he closed his eyes. There was no more blood seeping out of the bandage on his abdomen. Behind him, the door of the operating room was still lit with a red light. Emergency surgery was in progress. In addition to Huaisher, a total of 6 alchemists were attacked by unknown forces. There were 2 survivors. Earthquakes, air leaks, poisons, and even meteorites, everything seemed to be an accident. Other than that, on the way here, the others more or less encountered abnormal events. It was as if everyone was cursed. Everyone had met with an accident. And what was disturbing was that the more profound the alchemist's attainment was, the more dangerous the accidents they encountered were. Including the one who was right in the middle of it, Grand Master Galandon. Just outside the lounge, in a separate isolation room, a terrifying high temperature overflowed, turning it into a furnace. The rapidly operating dialysis machine couldn't get rid of the high heat. It was almost burned to ashes, but the skeleton was maintained by a miracle and didn't disappear. After filtering drop by drop of hot blood, it was transmitted back to the old body. Leaning on the chair, Galandon lowered his eyes. It was as if he was asleep. Only the lava-like blood flowed silently. Chapter 835. Blood Fever. That was what the alchemists called this symptom. It was a chain reaction caused by the precipitation of hell and abyss essence in the body. Over the years of contact with miracles and disasters, it was the alchemy poison that seeped into the body bit by bit. Overly large miracles and disasters were dependent on it. Once it entered the agitated stage, the source substance would quickly split, interfere with the body, and produce a terrifying high temperature. This was the love from the molten fire. The sick alchemist would instead be proud of it. If one did not go too far on this path, if one could not forge the purest miracles and disasters, it was absolutely impossible to have such deep karma. This was not a symptom that could not be suppressed and alleviated. It was even more so for Garland Ian. It was just that the timing was not right at such an awkward juncture. He could neither exchange blood nor cool it down with the silver cellar. In the environment on the surface of the moon, Garland Ian could only barely restrain himself. Through dialysis, the high heat in the body was dissipated at the fastest speed, and then injected with medicine to freeze and cool this high heat in a physical way. When the old man got up from the melting chair half an hour later, there was no longer any burning breath on his body. Instead, it emitted a bone-piercing chill. His eyes turned into a frozen pure white. When the door was pushed open, the noisy alchemists in the lounge finally calmed down. In a literal sense, they quieted down in the cold. The chill was pressing. Among the anxious alchemists someone said, "Great Master, we must set off immediately. If we delay any longer, we don't know what will happen." Garland Ian held his cane and walked forward slowly. He just said indifferently, "There are still people who haven't arrived. Isn't everyone here?" A red-haired alchemist stood up and retorted, "How long are we going to delay? Just to wait for a latecomer?" Ragnar Svaldson, the alchemist of the legendary Roman workshop, whose silver monument. This bearded middle-aged man had red hair in the literal sense of the word. It was bright red like fire, and there were strands of scarlet flowing through his hair. What was more surprising was his one eye. After losing his left eye, his right eye became strange and frightening. His pupils moved around in his eye socket without any pattern, cold and indifferent. Everything was revealed under the reflection of that eye, including Grand Master Garland in front of him. In his eyes, the old man was like a solemn skeleton bathed in lava. He wore a triple crown on his head and held a three-pronged helical scepter in his hand. He was both majestic and hideous. That was Garland's true form after discarding his weak appearance, the form of miracles and calamities created by himself. Eye of Truth. This was a technique unique to the Nordic lineage, imitating the ritual carried out by the great god Odin, who was once omniscient. He hung upside down in hell for 7 days and nights, offering one of his eyes and all of his vision to the abyss to obtain the mutated perception. This was also a secret method in alchemy, but sacrifices would not always be rewarded. There were very few who could succeed. It was also the reason why he dared to question the great Grandmaster. He was not far from that boundary. "It's not time to go yet, Ragnar." Garland looked at him calmly. "It is my duty to send every invited alchemist to Helios." An executioner of the Astronomical Society? Domba's hero? Ha, what has he done in alchemy? Ragnar sneered. "If you need brainless thugs, aren't there enough of them here?" "Ragnar, watch your words." A hoarse voice sounded, like iron scraping against each other. It was so sharp that it stung people's eardrums. In front of the window in the corner, a burly man leaning on a long scepter turned his head. He was not dressed like the other alchemists here, but wore a leather jacket and jeans that had weathered the vicissitudes of life, with a hunting knife at his waist. A cold light burst out from his eyes, and an out-and-out murderous intent emerged. He warned word by word, "There is a limit to a man's patience." It was Valery Yegorov, the master of metal of the Russian Federation, who had become enemies with Ragnar 10 years ago. Ragnar grinned and was about to retort, but Garland suddenly took a step forward and looked at him with his pale eyes. The coldness made his smile stiffen for a moment. Soon after, gloating laughter rang out from the crowd. "He won't be able to come." It was Rachel. The alchemist holding the silver mirror grinned and mocked indifferently. "Arrogant guy, he's simply digging his own grave." Under the prying of the silver mirror, the fluctuations of the source substance hundreds of kilometers away were projected, and the violent changes made everyone present shudder. No one knew what kind of fierce battle could cause such aftermath. Next to him, the young man smoking a cigar frowned slightly but did not speak. But then, his movements stagnated, and his expression suddenly changed. His whole body slid down from the sofa as if he had been smeared with oil. He almost turned into an afterimage and instantly appeared behind Garland. Everyone was instantly alert. "Izzy, what the hell are you doing?" But before they could react, Garland's scepter suddenly fell to the ground. In a low voice, a complicated alchemy ritual emerged from the scepter. A brilliant glow emerged from the scepter, illuminating everyone's eyes. It was the most famous and widely known achievement in alchemy, Midas touch. In the blink of an eye, a dazzling golden light spread out, almost enveloping the entire lounge. But what was faster than it was the flames of the explosion. It was simply an accident that happened once in 100 years. A small leak from the water circulation system caused water seepage. The low temperature froze the rubber cable and caused a short circuit under the interference of the moisture. Under layers of chain reactions, an open fire appeared in the maintenance room. A mechanic who was adding fuel was set ablaze. In the end, it triggered an explosion that swept across half of the base. The terrifying air pressure and temperature instantly spread from outside the lounge, destroying the walls and pouring into the room. Even the transformed gold could not completely stop the flying debris. But with the opportunity that Galandon had bought, every alchemist activated the border relics they carried with them. Layers of brilliance, flying metal or cold liquid rolled out, blocking the scorching blast that bore the brunt of the heat. But the loud sound of the explosion and the whine of the deck breaking mixed together. In the blink of an eye, the outermost deck of the lounge was torn into pieces. The vacuum endlessly sucked the thin air, forming a storm and pulling everyone out of the room along with the flames. The terrible low temperature, suffocation, and even the change in air pressure struck. Several alchemists rolled on the ground. Before they could get up, they sprawled in the moon dust, vomiting blood with difficulty. The sun is the father, the moon is the mother, the wind gives birth, the earth sustains. A low chant echoed in the rapidly thinning air. Then, the symbols of the four elements emerged and intertwined. On the surface of the moon, under the reflection of the sun, the blowing of the wind and the dancing moon dust, alchemy was completed in an instant from Garland's hands. An invisible blessing spread from beneath his feet, instantly enveloping most of the research base that was burning and exploding, bringing them precious oxygen and protection. A blessing was bestowed. Until now, there were still some who did not realize what had happened to them. Everyone was battered and exhausted. Only Izzy, who had the most agile reaction, was unscathed, and even had a cigar in his mouth. It was only after he brushed away the ashes that had fallen on his collar that he showed a look of lingering fear. There were also some who were coughing blood violently under the drastic change in air pressure, even losing consciousness. Because work on the moon was full of danger, there was a comprehensive system of precautions and remedies. Soon, under the organization of the base's researchers, the search and rescue team began to quickly search for survivors. Several alchemists who had lost consciousness were sent to the temporarily modified operation vehicle for surgery. The rest of the people also changed into spacesuits. Except for the Grand Master, all were wrapped in thick protective clothing. Even so, accidents continued to happen. There was a hole in Ragnar's spacesuit, and Valerie's spacesuit was hit by the explosion and released pure oxygen. If it had not been carefully checked, it would have been completely undiscovered. The ashen-faced stationmaster repeatedly assured everyone that he had checked it. He had also personally led the routine safety inspection yesterday, and there was no problem at all. Except for the grumpy Ragnar who was still angrily rebuking, the others' expressions suddenly became gloomy. There was no doubt that this was a curse. A calamity-level curse, a curse for all the alchemists present. Sorry, I can't stand it anymore. I quit. A younger alchemist took a few steps back and said with a pale face, I will pay the price for violating the contract, but I can't stand such an inexplicable thing happening to me. With that, he took out a relic from the border from his material bag. Although his heart ached, he still gritted his teeth and handed it over. But Galandon did not accept it. The price for violating the contract will be paid by the Stone Cauldron Society. It is the Stone Cauldron Society's responsibility that this happened. Galandon glanced at him and said solemnly, But is it okay to transfer your qualification? The young man nodded. Soon, Galandon nodded, took the token from his hand, and handed it to a disciple behind him. The person who quit hurriedly left. If anyone else wants to quit, I won't stop them. The conditions are the same as before, Galandon said. Anyone else? It's almost time for takeoff. This is your last chance. In the end, a total of 4 people quit, and these 4 people's places were replaced by Galandon's disciples. The number of 30 people was not reduced, but the atmosphere was visibly gloomy. Standing on the cold surface of the moon, staring at the flames that kept coming out and extinguishing in the wreckage in front of them, everyone's face was gloomy and uncertain. Even though they were wrapped in thick spacesuits, they could still feel the deep coldness of outer space seeping into their bones little by little. It made them want to shiver uncontrollably. Their breathing was out of balance, but in this silence there was an intermittent sound in the channel. It was mixed with electric current as if the signal was bad. It gradually became clear. So, the broken whistling gradually closed, and a cheerful tune echoed in everyone's ears with the sound of electric current. It was like a mockery from afar, making everyone's face gloomy. Who the hell is whistling? Valerie roared furiously. Can't you shut the F***ck up? At this time, to still turn on the public microphone and whistle, it was either brainless or heartless. But the whistling in the public channel did not stop at all. Instead, it became clearer. It became more cheerful. It was full of peace and joy, as if they felt happiness from the bottom of their hearts. In between the whistling, there were even people singing happily. Ding ding dong, bell ding dong, how happy we are sitting on the sleigh. In the dead silence, only the sound of singing echoed. Everyone looked at each other and looked around. Finally, they noticed the figure that was gradually enlarging and appearing on the horizon in the distance. Countless silver-white moon dust flew up under the impact, as if it had turned into snowflakes, floating in the low-gravity vacuum. It was so beautiful. Under the pull of a huge dog-like creature, the rope made of twisted cables was pulled taut, and the rough sleigh rolled forward at an incredible speed. It was like a train galloping on the surface of the moon. Loaded with heavy gifts, the bright red figure sitting on the front of the sleigh was happily singing. Just like that, it passed through the silent land that no one had stepped on for thousands of years. It drifted, it sped up, it swung its tail, it rotated twice, and it was so happy that it even drove backward. What is that? Wagner even wanted to lift his mask, rub his eyes, and ask dryly, Santa Claus? In the silence, no one responded. Everyone was stunned as they witnessed this strange scene that they had never seen in their deepest nightmares. On the moon, a person wearing a bright red spacesuit was sitting on a simple 3-wheeled sleigh, holding the reins, galloping under the pull of a giant dog, and singing loudly. The dog was even wagging its tongue in the vacuum with a face full of excitement, as if it didn't feel uncomfortable at all. When its saliva fell to the ground, it froze into crystal frost. When countless flashes of moon dust flew up, it was as if Santa Claus in the wasteland fairy tale had descended here. Breaking through the heavy snow, he sat on the sleigh, galloping across the fields, laughing and singing. The laughter was long and drawn out. In the end, the sleigh stopped in front of them with a beautiful drift. "Sorry, am I late?" The driver jumped down from the sleigh, patted his head, and looked at the Kepler base that was still burning and exploding in front of him, as well as the 2 rows of figures. He was stunned for a moment. It was as if he was flattered. Wow, they actually lined up to welcome us? They even prepared a bonfire party? "Why, Santa," Sure curiously asked, "is the Stone Cauldron Society so enthusiastic?" Silence. In the long silence, no one responded. Chapter 836. 10 minutes later, Sure squatted next to the burning base and finally figured out what had happened. It exploded? He couldn't believe it. Yes. The base master looked miserable. It exploded. "What about your restaurant?" Sure asked anxiously. "The famous restaurant that makes flying pancakes on the moon? It's gone." The base master's expression became more and more sorrowful. "The chef is dead." Sure was angry. "Is there something wrong with your lousy tour group?" Kepler base was gone before they even saw it. Such a big base, with the 10 famous restaurants on the moon, blew up just like that? Wasn't there nothing wrong when they came? Weren't the Space Shuttle and Mitra space station fine? Why did it change as soon as they entered the orbit of the moon? Sitting in the airborne capsule, they ran into a meteor shower. It wasn't easy to make it in time for landing, but Kepler base was gone? More importantly, how was he going to explain it to the dog? How was he going to explain it to the dog? "Sorry, the restaurant is gone? The flying pancakes are gone? Did you pull the sleigh in vain? I think you don't want to live anymore." Sure covered her face with her mask as she felt the pain of her future. The dog beside the sled was already impatient from waiting for the flying biscuits that Sure had promised. It was grinding its teeth against the frame of the sled. In the vacuum, there was no sound of grinding, only sparks could be seen flying. It illuminated the bodies piled up behind the sleigh. It was extremely horrifying. This was the gift Santa Claus brought. The bodies of the attackers they encountered on the way. Unfortunately, every face frozen in the extreme cold was exactly the same, without any difference. After the alchemists finished their inspection, they all fell silent. All of them were artificial humans, and they were the most common version, the most common type of production method, and there was no clue to trace them at all. And on Sure's shoulder, the unnoticed crow's phantom looked at everyone's appearance and gradually showed a meaningful smile. "Aha, it's getting interesting." Tongi laughed softly. "This curse is too innovative, so that's how it is." "Curse?" Sure asked. "That's right. Don't you understand, idiot?" Tongi said, "Everyone here, or to be exact, everyone who went to the Helios workshop has been cursed." Sure was stunned for a moment and frowned, sensing that something was wrong. Logically speaking, he should be very sensitive to such things as a negative energy rocket. Moreover, every curse that fell on him would basically be repelled by his divinity, and he even had an additional destruction elemental derivative in his body. While it was inauspicious, it could be said that his life was getting tougher, and what horoscope could counter him? Moreover, don't forget about the Book of Destiny. Have you ever heard of a tenfold rebound? Those who did so would only die a horrible death. Also, why hadn't he noticed anything? It's very simple, Sure. The curse is just its form and result. It's simply ingenious. No, it should be said that in order to achieve the means, it doesn't care about the purpose. In the end, it uses anti-aircraft guns to kill mosquitoes, right? Tongi understood it all after observing all the alchemists, because the main body of its effect was not a single individual. Instead, it was everything they saw. To put it simply, it was the entire surface of the moon, all the way up to the orbital layer. Someone had secretly set up a secret apparatus so large that it could cover the entire moon. Everyone who entered it. No, to avoid triggering more symptoms if the scope was too large, and to conserve power, The host of the secret apparatus had narrowed the targeted area. It was just targeted at all alchemists. Everyone who held the beacon of the Helios workshop. Due to the sheer size of the arcanum, the power distributed to every part of the arcanum grew thinner. Moreover, separated by a thick spacesuit, every alchemist did not notice the tiny signs that wrapped around them. None of them noticed the malice the moon had towards them. That was why Tangi lamented that it was like using anti-aircraft guns to kill mosquitoes. If the mountain doesn't come, I'll go. If there's no way to make the sun revolve around the earth, wouldn't it be the same if the earth revolves around the sun? Instead of having people step into the pit was moved to their feet. With such mastery and ability, it was almost possible to affect the moon's operation, while it merely pushed the environment to the opposite side of everyone. Instead of dealing with fate itself, it subtly manipulated probability to shift everything to the side of misfortune. It was as if a miracle had been turned into a calamity. Every stroke of luck would be turned into an equal amount of misfortune before it happened, and an equal amount of misfortune would stack with an equal amount of misfortune. Nothing good would happen, and accidents would happen frequently. It was not as simple as spending a few $1,000s to draw a 5-star character from a card pool. In this airless vacuum, on the surface of the moon that was filled with terrible cold, there was only death if any accident happened. But with such an ability, sending those androids to attack the alchemists was a little too superfluous. It was really puzzling. But now, although it was a little late, everyone had finally noticed the malice. Who was the one who created such a strange disaster? The moment he understood, Ragnar seemed to have thought of something. He suddenly raised his one eye and looked coldly at Rachel. Behind the helmet, Rachel's expression could not help but twitch. "You. Why are you looking at me?" "Because I have a question for you, Rachel." Ragnar took a step forward and asked, "Where did you go before you came to Kepler Base?" Rachel was taken aback, and then immediately became angry. I didn't go anywhere. Why are you asking this?" "Didn't go anywhere, huh? I took the Egyptian space station to the moon's central hub at the same time as you, but why did you come a day later than me?" Ragnar pressed on step by step, looking down at the old friend in front of him through the mask. "Where did you go?" "I didn't go anywhere, I was stuck in a traffic jam," Rachel retorted with his eyes wide open. "Why should I tell you where I went?" "Ha, I can guess even if you don't tell me. Just half an hour before you arrived, something suddenly happened in the dark side prison. Do you think there's something to do with it?" Ragnar sneered, a cold light shooting out of his one eye. His palm pressed against his waist, ready to strike. "Don't try to quibble, Rachel. The alchemy array of the dark side prison was made by our workshop, and I can see the residual disaster stain on you at a glance. You must have been in the dark side prison recently." "I." Rachel's voice became sharp. "It has nothing to do with you." "Then why are you lying?" Ragnar raised his voice and asked sternly, "What are you hiding with this secretive attitude?" He paused and asked word by word, "What does the death of Grandmaster Publius have to do with you?" As soon as he said this, everyone froze in place. They looked at each other. Publius Augustus, the Grandmaster who rose to prominence 80 years ago, the silver staff wielder, the man of fission, the wanderer, the explorer of the seventh creation, an existence who stood at the peak of source materials, he actually died so abruptly? It was unbelievable. Even Rachel stiffened. He stared blankly at the person in front of him. He couldn't believe his word. He's dead? He staggered back a step and immediately screamed crazily, "It has nothing to do with me, it has nothing to do with me, I just... He was just accompanying me, Ragnar." An old voice sounded. It was Galander. The old man calmly explained, "As an apothecary under the orders of the Stone Cauldron Society, Mr. Rachel accompanied me to check on Publius's physical condition before we set off. This was a secret mission, and he was forbidden to speak of it to anyone. Are you satisfied with this answer?" Ragnar fell into silence. It was as if he couldn't understand why another Grandmaster would be involved in Publius's death. He thought darkly, perhaps Publius's death was Galander's doing? Or perhaps the Stone Cauldron Society was happy to see this happen. When he thought of Publius's numerous unique technologies and patents, everything seemed to be explainable, but the water behind this was a bit too deep. What he had originally thought to be a deep pool had turned into a pitch-black and tyrannical ocean, and he no longer dared to look into it. And Galander didn't doubt how Ragnar knew about Publius's death. After all, the base of the alchemy array of the Shadowside prison was made and maintained by the workshop he was in, the Silver Steel. Such a big thing had happened, and he was on the moon. Logically and emotionally, his senior apprentice brother would have informed him as soon as possible. I know what you want to ask, Ragnar, and I can answer you. Although I don't know the origin of this curse, I can conclude that it has nothing to do with Publius's death. Galandian then revealed another great secret. Oh my God! Although his Alzheimer's was most likely a disguise, as early as 15 years ago, Publius's soul had already begun to gradually wither, and his source substance had decayed. All that was left was a skeleton. Otherwise, he wouldn't have died so tragically in the process of breaking out of prison. Amidst everyone's silence, Galander finally said, "The current state of his death is still sealed. Before the results of the investigation are out, we can't announce it to the public, and I hope you won't spread it." Ragnar bowed his head and didn't speak again. On the side, Huaishur, who had dug out the kitchen refrigerator from the ruins with great difficulty and was feeding the dog vacuum pancakes, raised his head in confusion. He felt that he had missed an earth-shattering melon. "What are you talking about?" Just like that, 10 minutes later, the chicken finally finished the rice, the fire burned through the lock, and the dog finished the pancakes, after many twists and turns, at the predetermined time, place, and alchemists were finally about to embark on the final journey. Toward their final destination, the Helios workshop. When the search and rescue team cleaned up the ruins of the base and found Ragnar's body, it was already 6 hours later. Chapter 837. On the moon's surface, at the entrance of the Kepler Valley, the landing zone. Huaishur tugged on the leash, and looked around curiously with Broken Dog, not knowing where the flight they had booked was. Then, a silent disciple behind Garland Dion stepped forward and took out a long white bone horn from his chest. Then, under the protection of Garland Dion, the disciple lifted his mask, and without panting, bit the mouthpiece, puffed up his cheeks and blew with all his might. What was this? A cosmic concert? Huaishur was dumbfounded, but then he heard a mighty roar echo in the vacuum. It was not a frequency that could be heard by the human ear. Only with the support of Supreme could one feel the distant echo like a whale's song. It was transmitted in the vacuum. It blew into the distance. Then, above the moon's orbit, a huge shadow slowly descended. Under the illumination of the landing zone's lights, a black dot quickly enlarged, and finally, a huge body appeared. Its long tail rolled up waves of source matter, and waves of blue light appeared like water waves, illuminating its appearance. Its signature huge head and slender body, and even its exaggerated size that was comparable to a warship, made Huaishur want to scratch his head. That was a sperm whale? A sperm whale that was alive and kicking in space, swimming in the vacuum. No way was it so magical? He completely forgot that he was holding an even more magical thing in his hand, and the thing in his hand was staring straight at the sperm whale, and it was already licking its lips eagerly. It was a thing that had not been touched yet. Was it delicious? "Friend, is this your first time seeing it?" Next to Huaishur, a figure came up and privately chatted with Huaishur in the channel. "That's an alchemy creature modified by the Shifu Institute, created with the offspring of Leviathan, and finally got a living border relic. It's like the biochemical beasts in America, but much more convenient. Oh, your dog is so cute, can I pet it?" Broken Dog turned around and coldly glanced at the eager man, baring its teeth. "Ha, it's got character." The newcomer waved his hand indifferently and took a step back. Through his mask, Sure could see the cigar still burning behind it. Other than in the game, it was the first time he saw a smoker who could light a cigarette in a spacesuit. Hello, what's your name?" Sure stretched out his hand. The man smoking the cigar shook his hand and shook it twice. "American alchemist, Izzy Yatel. Actually, the full name is longer than that, but you can call me Izzy." He looked to be about the same age as Sure, with a smile. He did not seem to be cold and rejected by others. With vitality and kindness that other alchemists did not. Sure, from the ivory tower, before Sure could finish her self-introduction, Izzy nodded in understanding. "Classical music classroom? I know. You're quite famous in the Ivy League." Is it?" "Yes." Izzy nodded and sighed. "To be honest, I didn't expect that my niece, with her arrogant character, could make friends. It's really surprising." Sure's expression twitched, and he suddenly felt that something was not right. "Wait, niece? Who is it?" Liz Hetmock, didn't she tell you about me?" Izzy looked at him curiously. "Maybe it's because I'm an uncle who idles around every day, and it's embarrassing in the family." Sure was silent for a long time. He moved a little to the side, and then moved a little more, guarding against this guy who would pull out his sword and attack him. This wave, it was the parents who bullied a child coming to find him. Who would have thought that this guy, who looked so young, was actually an uncle? Ha, don't worry, although it's a family in fact, there is no similar bloodline, just obeying tradition. Izzy took a big puff of the cigar, and his smile became more and more cheerful in the smoke. He patted Sure's back. "Just think of me as a tourist." Izzy shrugged. "I'm a white sublimator, I don't even have a stigmata, and I know nothing about alchemy. I'm just here to greet an old friend on behalf of an elder in the family. If something happens, remember to help me out for Liz's sake." Sure did not speak. He showed a kind of smiling awkwardness without losing his politeness. As for Izzy's self-introduction and purpose, he did not believe a single punctuation mark. Izzy seemed to be aware of his vigilance, but he did not care and was still as enthusiastic as before. He moved to Sure's side and began to introduce his classmates loudly to the freshmen like a blonde character in a cartoon. "The one-eyed one is called Ragnar, an alchemist from the Silver Monument, a little arrogant and bad-tempered. The one behind him is an alchemist from the Russian Federation, Valery. He's good at metallurgy, but he's more like a sublimator than an alchemist, which seems to be very similar to you, but he seems to be harder to deal with than Ragnar. As for the one behind Galandon, it's the pharmacist Rachel. That old lady Yima is an alchemist from the Egyptian royal family. As for those few who are autistic, they are all Galandon's students. They have sworn an oath of silence, and except for the necessary communication when participating in the secret ceremony, they will not speak at all." Sure was dizzy from listening to the names of the dishes, and he did not remember any of them at all. Anyway, to summarize the central idea, everyone was difficult to get along with, ostracized foreigners, and looked down on you for having a lower level of education. But it didn't matter, if you felt bored and wanted to have a heart-to-heart talk, don't forget to look for me. He had been taken advantage of for nothing. By the time he finished speaking, they were already on the boat. After passing through the mouth of the sperm whale that was like a gate, the space behind was unexpectedly spacious. There was a conference room, a lounge, and even a single room for each person. Of course, the most important thing was the well-equipped alchemy workshop of the whole realm. Every item belonged to the kind that had been on Sure's shopping list for hundreds of years, and could only be taken out to take a look at during the holidays, and did not dare to click the buy button at all. In the past, Sure would have taken the risk to buy one out of desperation. Fortunately, times had changed. Now that there was something from the ivory tower that could be bought for free at any time, Huaisher had a lot more confidence for no reason, and he could even lift his pants and say, "Here it is." After the rooms were prepared for everyone, the lifelike puppets that looked like ordinary people returned to their jobs on their own. The son of Leviathan, who looked like a sperm whale, swayed its long tail in the silent whale song and swam into deeper and darker space. Huaisher led the dog, and stood in front of the large floor-to-ceiling window in the corridor, and suddenly felt the benefits of the fantasy style. Countless stars flew past in front of his eyes, and he did not even feel the slightest tremor, and even the gravity was normal. There were green plants on both sides, and there were even chairs and round tables in the corners for guests to rest at any time. Unlike the miserable life in other space stations, the supplies and services here were so generous that it made people cry. Ringing the bell could call for 24-hour service, and there were even massages and spas. It was a fantasy. Was this alchemy? Love, love. After leaving the moon, it could be seen that everyone's complexion was much better. At the very least, they were far away from the entanglement of misfortune and misfortune, ensuring their own safety. Only Huaisher was still cautious, and he even stuffed his spacesuit in his saddlebag, ready to run at any time. Sitting in the airdrop cabin exploded. Going to Kepler, the base exploded. He was afraid that the ship would also explode. The world was getting more and more outrageous these days, and even people dared to break out of the dark side prison, so he had to be on guard. What if, right? Now, in front of the window, Huaisher stared at the twinkling stars, and gradually, he became fascinated. Until the phantom of Crow appeared on his shoulder. "What are you thinking about?" Tanguy asked. "Why are you so engrossed?" "How should I put it? It feels strange that there is such a sci-fi thing like space in such a fantasy world." Huaisher pinched his chin and sighed with confusion. There is a subtle feeling of crosstalk. You see, sitting in the fantasy realm and coinciding with sci-fi. Isn't this a bit inappropriate? Isn't this very normal? Tanguy calmly waved her little wings with a look of nonchalance. Isn't science originally something to replace magic? It's not strange. It's better to say that this is normal. Otherwise, what do you think the present realm is? Huaisher thought for a long time and asked tentatively, "A big ball in a glass cover. Isn't that the definition of Earth?" Tanguy said, "In the end, the present realm is the aggregation of matter. Other than being able to bask in the sun, it's no different from hell." "No, that's not what I mean." Huaisher shook his head and explained, "Before I became an ascendant, I always believed in the infinite sea of stars and the existence of aliens." Tanguy looked at him doubtfully. "You can believe it now? Do you think it's all a lie?" Isn't it?" Huaisher was dumbfounded. "Didn't they say that the sun is essentially the manifestation of the pillar of God's essence? So many stars are just the projection of destiny. Besides, aren't there no living creatures in outer space?" "That depends on how you interpret it." Tanguy thought for a moment and told him, "In essence, everything in the present realm, including Earth and space, as well as so many stars and infinite space, is just a way of manifestation. A result of expression. A world, explained by laws and science, has been deeply ingrained day after day since hundreds of years ago, and is unshakable. But this does not contradict the common sense that ascendants know." Huaisher shook his head. "But in such a world, where is hell, Tanguy? In such a world, does it really need something as illusory as hell?" That's a good question." She laughed, raised her wings and leaned against Huaisher's neck, and suddenly asked, "Speaking of which, what do you think of the existence of the depth, Huaisher? Where do you think the physical body of hell is in the present realm? How do you explain the spatial relationship between hell and hell?" Huaisher was stunned. He was speechless. Tanguy continued to ask, "Don't tell me that you're right in front of me. Isn't this cold vacuum hell for humans? Aren't astronauts and ascendants very similar to Earth? Are abyssal creatures different from aliens in the eyes of humans?" Huaishur was silent for a long time and instinctively shook his head. You're confusing the concept. You know it's not the same thing at all. Their depth did not change at all. Huaishur also could not feel the existence of the abyss sediment. This was indeed the present realm. But Tongyi's words made him fall into deep thought. Because the world in front of him was also a hell that humans could not survive in. And are you beginning to understand, Huaishur? Tongyi laughed softly as if she was lamenting. The world has always been the world. Huaishur, it has just been redefined. In modern terms, it should be the observer effect, right? In ancient times, the world of humans was so simple. As long as the round sky and the square earth were enough to satisfy them. At worst, they could add an elephant to hold it up. If they felt that they couldn't hold it up, they could put a giant turtle. If the sky was going to collapse, they could cut off a few turtles' feet to prop it up. If there was a flood, then it must be the anger of the gods to build a boat to float. She said, at that time the existence of the gods was the wall of the present realm. They were derived from the pillars, existed in accordance with the will of heaven, followed the wishes of humans, interpreted the world, and isolated the invasion of hell. But the era of the gods had passed, and they were all dead. The era of humans had arrived. Unlike the past, magic had disappeared, gods had died, humans had redefined everything, and the world had changed. However, the essence had not changed at all. What had changed was only the angle of observation. So there was a law, a framework, the existence of the three major blockades in science, and this endless space that had never been there in the past. But the existence of everything would not be without reason. Indeed, the brilliance of the stars is a symbol of the operation of the will of heaven. But if you trace its origin, there must be a source. Even if there is nothing in the dark outer space, and the so-called stars are just lifeless aggregations of matter, they still have an irreplaceable meaning. The so-called space is originally the manifestation of the endless hell in the present realm. Tongyi stared at the countless stars and told him, at the end of the billions of stars, where the cold brilliance comes from, is hell itself. The so-called abyss and the so-called space had never been different to humans. They were both distant and mysterious places, full of danger and taboos. In the dark space, those sparkling things, those fleeting phantoms, those were all projections from hell in the distant depth. Separated by a long depth, their power attracted the convergence of matter, forming barren skeletons, declaring their existence. In the end, under the power of the law called gravity, the resplendent sea above this depth was formed. Look, Huaishur, the fire of the sun has disappeared. In the reflection of the glass, between the countless jumping lights, the magnificent phantom held his shoulder, lowered her head, and whispered in his ear. Now we are sailing above the abyss. Chapter 838. After spending half a day, Huaishur finally understood the changes after the end of the Age of Gods. When scholars replaced magic with science composed of countless laws, and the three major blockades transformed the entire realm, space emerged spontaneously. As a symbol of the abyss in the present realm, countless hells under the depths reflected the stars. This was a necessary link for the world to be able to operate in a harmonious and self-consistent manner. Of course, in the present realm above the depths, all you can see is a pile of barren stones. All changes in the depths must be achieved by the rules of the present realm. Only the present realm is the most convenient entrance to hell, so you don't have to worry about a hell entrance suddenly appearing in front of you. Tongyi said, the only exception is the moon. Huaishur was puzzled. The sun and the moon have been the most important concepts of every civilization and every era since ancient times, Huaishur. Tongyi continued to explain. The sun is the embodiment of the pillar of the spirit, and the moon is actually inextricably linked to the present realm. As a blank star, it is regarded as the safety bolt of the entire present realm. It helps the present realm to share the pressure from the abyss all the time. Once the deep erosion exceeds the critical point, part of the pressure will be discharged to the moon first. It's like a flood relief area under a flood. At the same time, it is also the shield of the present realm, resisting most of the changes caused by the operation of the abyss in space. It sounded so miserable. It was simply a tool star. Weisher pitted it when he heard it. It was used as a utility room and a wall, suffered for no reason, and was bombarded by meteorites every now and then. It could only be said that planets and planets were not the same. In addition, even a god's creation like Helios, who has the dual attributes of the present realm and hell, can't enter the depths of hell in space. It can only descend power in the form of a projection. Tanguy sighed, appearing once every 70 years, and then being autistic for 70 years. TSK, there must be something wrong with the brain. That's why orphan players are so pitiful. Weisher seemed to detect a well-concealed mockery and malice from the teasing tone. But when he looked back, she returned to the appearance of a crow and looked at him innocently. Forget it. Give me some face and pretend that nothing happened. Weisher withdrew his gaze. Just like that, a day passed quickly. When Weisher went to the dining hall for dinner, he found that there was only Izzy and himself in the large dining hall. Where are the others? Weisher sat on the chair and asked curiously. They all went to their rooms. So, alchemists are a bit too reclusive. Izzy smoked a cigar and took one out of her pocket. Do you want one? Forget it, I tried it once and I choked. Weisher lowered his head and glanced at the menu before turning to the puppet beside him. Give me a bowl of ramen and raw meat for my dog, thank you. Don't you want to try foie gras with caviar? Izzy wiped the corner of her mouth and took a sip of red wine. The caviar here is very authentic and has a unique flavor. Ah, I forgot that you're the hell cooking demon. Showing off your slight skill in front of an expert. Is that what you Dongxia people say? Okay, your Dongxia language is already very standard. Weisher's head hurt a little. He felt that Izzy's image was beginning to overlap with the Dongxia language in some divine TV series. Don't be so cold, Mr. Weisher. We still have a long time to spend together. Izzy put down the cigar and spread her hands. I'd like to make friends with you. No, I'm already under a lot of pressure to have your niece as a friend. Weisher's scalp was a little numb. To be honest, in this damn alchemy tour group, the one who made him the most uneasy now was not Garlandian, but this seemingly young old ghost in front of him. The others came here for their own reasons, but he didn't understand why Izzy, a non-alchemist and a blank sublimator, came here. After all, it was outrageous that an inheritor of noble blood from America was still a blank sublimator until now. She didn't have any stigmata. As if she was really here for a vacation, smoking, drinking and eating caviar, she wanted to make friends with Weisher. But why? We don't match. Donba Corporation didn't have any business dealings with America, and the relationship between the Ivory Tower and the Ivy League was even more complicated. Weisher could understand why Izzy rejected him like the others. However, this sudden kindness left him a little confused. What was she after? This is the fun of traveling, Mr. Weisher, Izzy said with a grin. You don't know what will happen, and you don't know what kind of people you will meet, so you have to cherish every moment and every partner you meet. If you ask me, there's nothing wrong with maintaining a cautious attitude like you, but you will miss a lot of fun. If you like traveling so much, I'll introduce a friend who loves traveling to you someday, Weisher suggested sincerely. I believe you will have a common language with him. Well, as long as you don't dislike him for always wearing a gray suit and looking like an overworked worker. Izzy smiled and didn't say anything else. She just looked at the way Weisher and his dog ate, and even added a seafood set for the dog. Then she found that the dog didn't appreciate it. It didn't even wag its tail twice. It directly opened its mouth and swallowed the plate, and gnawed 2 holes in the floor. "Is this also your work? It's amazing." Izzy sighed. "Can I borrow it to breed?" The dog's eyes suddenly became dangerous. Izzy chuckled and waved her hands. She was actually apologizing to a dog. Then she offered a whole barbecue platter as an apology. "To be honest, I really don't see the need for you to go to Helios." Huaisher sighed and asked in confusion, "If you want to talk about alchemists, there are many in America, right? The legendary workshop, I remember that the 4-leaf clover is in America, right?" "It's not the same, Huaisher." Izzy shook her head and smiled cheerfully. "That's the oldest alchemy workshop, a miracle creation that can almost be traced back to the prehistoric Chaos era. It's a legend of legends that contains the technology of the gods' era. If I don't go there when I have the chance, it'll be a regret in my life. Besides, don't I still have a mission? Mission? To chat with an old friend on behalf of her parents? I'll be damned if I believe you." Huaisher shook his head, bowed his head, and finished his noodles, and politely said goodbye. Izzy still sat in the same place, enjoying her dinner. When the elevator door opened, Huaisher's movements paused for a moment. He didn't expect there to be people inside. It was the one-eyed alchemist named Ragnar, and another man named Rachel. The two seemed to be arguing in a low voice, and the impatient Ragnar had already pulled Rachel's collar. At the elevator entrance, Huaisher coughed in a low voice. He paused and looked at Dumu coldly. Huaisher and the dog also looked over curiously. "Good evening, both of you," Huaisher said. "Do you mind letting me use the elevator?" In the long silence, Ragnar slowly let go of his hand and patted Rachel's collar. Rachel ran out of the elevator like he was escaping, not even saying thank you. Ragnar gave Huaisher a mocking look. "If I were you, I wouldn't meddle in other people's business, Huaisher. Mister. I'm used to it." Huaisher shrugged, raised his hand, and pressed the up button to stop the elevator from closing. Ragnar snorted and walked straight out, trying to knock away Huaisher, who was blocking the way. But Huaisher was still smiling, and even the dog behind him stuck out his tongue happily. Full of expectation, he seemed to have noticed something. Ragnar's movements paused for a moment, and his expression became gloomier. He turned sideways in humiliation and brushed past Huaisher. Behind him, as the elevator door slowly closed, he suddenly turned back and glanced coldly into the elevator. The eye of truth lit up with a sharp light, brewing some kind of malice and curse. But then, everything seemed to have changed. At Huaisher's feet, the overly lively wolf dog suddenly tilted its head and looked over. Grin. Simple and honest smile. But under the gaze of the eye of truth, the funny smile rapidly expanded, multiplied, and changed shape. After tearing apart the original camouflage, it turned into an amorphous, ferocious outline. A wriggling gloom. Like a crack leading to the abyss, it outlined the terrifying reflection of a predator. The indescribably ferocious essence of the abyss wrapped around its 2 pairs of asymmetrical and strange eyes, and endless darkness gushed out from them. It was as if the incarnation of the abyss had descended here, wanting to tear everything in front of it apart and greedily devour all the starlight into its belly. The startling reflection made Ragnar freeze in place in disbelief. But when he subconsciously looked at Huaisher, the elevator door was about to close, and he couldn't see his face clearly. At that moment, he just felt a sharp pain. From the anxiety and pain in his eyes. Light. It was as if there was endless light gushing out from between the closed iron doors, spreading violently and solemnly, covering everything in it. Burning everything to nothing. But a crisp sound burst out of the silence. Blood-colored tears seeped out from the corners of his eyes. A terrible crack spread out from this incomparably precious eye. In the dead silence, Ragnar froze in place as if he had turned into a stone statue. After a long, long time, the man raised his finger, pierced his eye socket, and took off the eyeball. Without pity, he crushed the eyeball to pieces. His 5 fingers clenched. Then, a faint light came through, and when his 5 fingers unfolded again, an intact and magnificent eye had appeared in his hand. It returned to his eye socket. Ragnar turned and walked to the restaurant, as if nothing had happened. That night, late at night, Huishur, who was tossing and turning, had a strange dream. In a trance, he seemed to have turned into stone, into running water, and into the wind, shuttling through the barren land and the world. He vaguely caught a glimpse of a lonely figure on a horse. The middle-aged man with stubble on his face was so haggard and his eyes were empty. He wandered through the world like a beggar, bending down and speaking to all the living things he encountered. To birds, snakes, insects, flowers, dragons in the sky, elves in the water, and demons in the dark caves. A humble plea. A plea. In the end, Huishur finally heard the hollow and numb voice. The man raised his head and looked at Huishur. It was as if he had caught a glimpse of an outsider who had broken into this dream from a long time ago. The hoarse voice was like thunder, bursting out from Huishur's soul, almost causing his consciousness to collapse. He said, "Please mourn for him. You're tuning in to the Phoenix Nights YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories."